See if we can get started as we are. I was asking what everyone thought of the essay. Might start there. Pull it up for myself. Webb's third aspect, abstraction as ideology. Ideology as abstraction. Been wanting to do this one for a while. I think this is a very interesting essay. Yep, everybody coming in. As ever with Kenneth, packs a lot into his paragraphs, covers a lot of ground in the amount of space he gives himself. It certainly is, I think, a good overview of what ideology is, how ideologies take a hold of our minds, and how they well, yeah, how they warp and deform our thinking when we're putting ourselves in a particular pre-constructed, prefabricated box, whatever that happens to be. And virtually everything can be counted as an ideology. Certainly the big ones like Christianity, capitalism, science. That one's tough for people, but it's true. But yeah, if you go through Webb's, all of the different, I got mine here. Yeah, all of the different chapters, parables, are all called something. Mysticism, illusionism, authoritarianism, secularism, fatalism, subjectivism, monetarism, humanism, consumerism, eternalism, prioritism, narcissism, exceptionalism, altruism, extrovertism, pedanticism, polemicism, criticism, historicism, arbitrarianism, simplism, democratism, irrationalism, conformism, nihilism, teleologism, skepticism, monasticism, academicism, and so on and so on, agonism. Yeah. You see, anything that ends with an ism is an ideology.
So like the John Lennon song, "Give Peace a Chance," ism.
Yeah. How you conceive of phenomena, reality, what's happening, the lenses you see through, the reality tunnel you see through, the ones you know about and the ones you don't know about, conscious and subconscious. Yeah, anything that's an ism is an ideology, and they're virtually impossible to escape. I think, Marx would call it the opium of the mind, or the pre-laid track of conceiving of the world and reality. And any kind of thinking that you want to do and you want to accomplish, you're going to have to get out of that somehow. It's not easy, but step outside from a third vantage point to be able to look clearly at the facts on the ground. Hmm. 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 Uh, Certainly, I think one thing we could do is just go through the point by point. Let me see here, or not point by point, but just take random points here. What is the distinctive keynote, the cultural dominant to which modern order is attuned? Abstraction, abstractedness, abstractivist predisposition, a compulsion, like a religion, to orient oneself in terms of ideas and ordering principles in which one believes in abstracto, regardless of what they may mean or what actual shape of life may result from their practice. The system of absolutist Christian faith succeeded so profoundly despite its incoherence and corruption that even today multitudes cannot be convinced it no longer exists as a culture in its own right. It is a husk, like the husk left over from an insect that has molted. A husk overrun by parasitic ideologies, radically incompatible with the spirit of classical Christianity, by white supremacism, materialism, authoritarianism, etc. Not the spirit, but the letter. The external and institutionalized form survives as a delusional shell, impotent to imprint itself on profound character. We could take just that as as a talking point. But let me do that. And he goes on to do the metaphor of the World War II Japanese soldiers who don't realize when World War II was over, and they spend decades alone in the jungle, imagining that they're still fighting. The metaphor being that Christianity died 700 years ago, and they still have sway over their followers. Well, it amuses me. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So, anybody has anything they wanted to mention? Let me see here. There we go. Modern culture, too, is already like that, morally and rationally incoherent, devoid of effective principles of authority or sanity. Mm. 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 We have, it could be said, we have principles of authority or sanity. Are they effective? Not sure you would look to our leaders for principles of authority or sanity, or rather effective principles of authority or sanity, or our religious leaders. Yeah, Ayla, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's more useful. First of all, I wanted to recommend, I put it in the chat, Peter Berger's The Social Construction of Reality. It looks to me like all this very interesting topic is part of the sociology of knowledge. And it gives us, I think, it encourages us to use not only some humility in terms of what we believe is the right or wrong, but kind of shake down the certainty in anything that we really know. However, to be more practical, because we can't proceed in the world without some ideology. It's impossible for us to go from A to B. So how do we distinguish between the different isms? I wouldn't say that the status of science's ideology is the same as the status of religion. And it's not just Christianity, any religion.
Sure, and I would certainly hesitate to have one of those one prescription fills all answers. I don't think there's any formula that would be appropriate for every individual or every group or every country or every collective. This is why thinking is important. We can't have simplistic answers. I think ideologies, yeah, as you say, they're tools. They're tools of the mind, as anything, and you use them appropriately. You have to be smart and consider everything in its context. There are times when you would want to adopt a faith or a religion. There are times when you would want to apply science. There are times when you would want to apply a certain conception of finances or the economy or something like that. But yeah, I think the point is most people don't apply that kind of rigorous thought on it. They just do it subconsciously. They do it according to their training, according to their background, according to how they were raised. Just go along with the herd, and that's never good. You just have to put on your thinking cap and try to work through what the matter at hand is. And most people don't. Most people, it's just an automatic, unthinking, unconsidered approach to life, and they just take what they were given uncritically.
Doesn't the thinking approach require abstraction?
Mm-hmm.
It does, right? So it can't really be against abstraction. If I'm going to think about something, I need abstraction to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe abstraction is like one step, but then we need to try to reintegrate it back into the world, into our bodies, into our actions. And there are all these different models, but they're almost like applications in a way, these mental models. And we don't use an application for everything we do. We use it for particular things that it's relevant or that it's useful for. And so maybe it's up to, in the abstraction, for us when we're within that dimension of mind, to be able to try to figure out if this model is congruent with the world, or if it is useful for us or practical in a way, and why we're using it, so that it doesn't use us and end up blocking out all other possibilities.
Do you have an example in mind?
So when it comes to ideology, I'm just thinking of like, just for example, like a Marxist might look at everything in terms of only economic relations. So everything has to do with class, or everything has to do with whatever it is that is primary within that paradigm. But the world is a little bit more complicated than that. There are other variables that are connected to everything that happens in the world, and not just those. But that doesn't mean that we should dismiss those, but that we should use them and apply them to the cases in which they're most relevant.
Yeah, I think Zeno's paradox kind of is a really telling example of how abstraction can lead you in into this paradox that Achilles can never catch up with the turtle, because he has to think of space as though you can divide it up, and or think of time as though you can divide it up like you do space. And so he could never catch up with the turtle because of that fact. So that's thinking about time in terms of abstraction. And so, so you have to get away from that kind of abstraction where it misleads you into that kind of paradox.
I wonder to what extent you can try to assign these value judgments to something that's by definition subconscious, right? If we're talking about ideology and abstraction, to what extent? I mean, presumably you're going to be judging ideologies on the basis of themselves, or on the basis of some other ideology. So I don't know what the reference point for value judgments would be, to go back to, I think, Shirley's question.
Another question.
It ain't easy. Certainly one thing I would recommend for anybody is not to do it alone. Peer review. Make sure you're no, that helps. That helps a lot. Make sure you're connecting with other people, not just, people who themselves are captured by ideologies, but who are themselves pretty good at considering things from a different perspective. I think peer review is very important, no matter what it is we're dealing with. Yeah, Ayla, go ahead.
Yeah, there's some abstractions that are very helpful, such as induction and deduction, the way science has a hypothesis and replicates the test and replicates and comes, if it comes to the same conclusion, what we get is an abstraction, is a probability, again, not certainty, but this kind of abstraction seems to work quite well in our lives, helpful for us to know, to get at least a probable direction as to where to go. So I wouldn't put science and religion in the same category at all.
Oh, I very definitely would.
I would.
Yeah. In terms of the terms that we're talking about today, it is the same. They're both ideologies. In these terms, they are ways of conceiving reality, ways of conceiving the situation that we're dealing with. If you look at things only scientifically, you get one version of the world. If you look at things only from a Christian viewpoint, you get one version of the world. It is an ideology. The best thing to do is to take it all in as a holistic context and, take 4 or 5 different reality tunnels, 4 or 5 different pairs of sunglasses to get as much of a well-rounded view as possible. And science is every bit as much of a warping viewpoint as any other. Read Max Weber, or Wittgenstein. Any ideology will warp your perception of the world, and science does just as well. So yeah.
So you're talking about more philosophical approach then, right?
The best measure I've seen for how very elitist one-sided either are is philosophy is kind of the bridge. But if you go up to a religious person and you start spouting philosophy, they're going to go up to a science person and start spouting philosophy, they're going to do the same thing. So it's like we're the bridge, but either side doesn't really like each other. They don't like us because we're bridging both sides.
Yeah, I think when we inhabit an abstract conceptual model, we tend to block it off from the emotional underpinnings, and therefore we end up thinking this is the truth, whether it's science or religion. And when it comes to science, it is true when it comes to attempting to measure and quantify the external appearances of matter. But when it comes to the internal qualities, it doesn't have access to that. And how do we gain access to that? That's a whole other, question that science can't really offer us, at least yet. And so we need to almost figure out different ways of relating to the world and to reality, whatever that is. And maybe sometimes there's a subjective kind of science that we can incorporate that allows us to kind of bridge the gap between the subject and the object. And that seems to go beyond materialist science. And you can see that in philosophy, the arts, and even just psychology when it comes to understanding the neurology of the human organism and how it operates, and all the cognitive biases that are like filters to absolute truth, whatever that might be. And so when we become more aware of that, maybe we can figure out different ways to orient ourselves into the world that might be more beneficial,
But
instead
Andy,
of only just hanging on to the scientific materialist paradigm, thinking that's the objective truth.
Can we move anywhere and explain anywhere without abstraction, like language? Language is an abstract. The words are abstractions. The concept we use.
Okay. As we covered when we covered the abstraction and specialization essay, I believe we covered it last time. To give it its due, abstraction is indeed abstraction, the power of the mind to steal things out of context, to decompose and simplify reality, to separate elements and disjoint relations is indeed one of the two great techniques of thinking. Part of the natural repertory of currents in which the mind moves. We compose and decompose, associate and dissociate, relate and distinguish, synthesis and analysis, the putting together and breaking down by which our minds arrive at complex and simple objects of understanding. Yeah, I mean, abstraction is certainly a wonderful tool. It's a great tool. It's very useful. It's a useful, helpful tool, and needs to be used. We don't dispense with it entirely, but I think it's the same old Apollonian versus Dionysian. We're out of balance. We're entirely over into the rationalized, abstract version of culture and civilization and society. Yeah,
maybe
go
it's
ahead,
not
Ryan.
abstraction. It might be the idolatry of abstraction. That is the problem.
Yeah, I could answer that from a computer science perspective, but I don't know how relevant that would be to philosophy. I mean, at least in computer science, you have a very clear distinction between the definition of something or the implementation of something, and then the declaration. And the truth of an object when you program it, like the memory allocation, the instruction set, it's only in a few slight, somewhat irrelevant cases is that ever really possible. But everywhere else, there's just this abstract concept of what an object could be, and then the implementation of what that object then becomes. But the true nature of an object, at least in computer programming, is never really realized. Does that kind of answer? I think the translation might be, the abstraction goes both ways. I think if you're trying to understand like the truth of a concept, like what a word would really refer to, I think of Theseus's ship. Like there's no reality or something to what the abstraction is based on. There's just the thing it refers to, and then the construction of that thing.
No, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
I wanted to get back to Andy's point about cognitive biases. We know about cognitive biases because we test them scientifically. Like we can have some subjects answer some questions, and then we can give them prompts, right? We can maybe frame the question in a certain way, or we'll give them a third choice that didn't exist before, and things like that. And by doing these experiments, this is how we reveal that these biases exist. If we want to overcome biases, we need to be scientific. We're not going to overcome biases by ignoring the science or by not quantifying. The only way to overcome them is to be scientific.
Oh, goodbye. Young's on, you better.
Yeah, I agree. I
Context.
think that's.
Sorry.
Oh, you can go ahead.
The context is definitely everything. My mom's side of the family is Ashkenazi Jewish, or stems from Ashkenazi Jewish from Western Asia and North Africa. And so I have fairly dark skin and all that. But people always ask me, since we're in Austin, if I'm Hispanic. And I think it's kind of context because of the Mexican border. So I always say I want to spend a year in the Midwest, go to like Minnesota, Wisconsin, just to see what people ask me, because I will lose that context.
I wonder, been thinking, and maybe building off of what Andy was saying, and also what we've been talking about, I guess. But if we're talking about abstraction or even language or any of these things functioning as tools for interrogating, phenomena or reality, then what is it that we're trying to get at is maybe something that is of an essence, and that essence is a thing we can't really articulate, and so we use these tools to kind of grapple with it, right? And it seems as though that essence is also located somewhere where ideology is, because how does it tip towards ideology is when, well, we want it to become a belief system. We want it to become something that then encompasses our entire experience, which we already know ideologies can't do that. So I'm just trying to parse out like maybe the function of the tool and then what it is we're actually after. And it seems like what we're after is something that is contained within an ideology, but perhaps what is the essence of the thing we're looking at might be the actual question, something like that. I don't know.
It seems like we're looking for something concrete in an abstraction, something that will not die, like ourselves in a way. It almost seems to be like you can see ideology in politics supplanting the ideology in religion as just another thing to hold on to, because possibly it might have something to do with something much deeper when it comes to our relationship with our own mortality. And we cling to these abstractions because they're not, set in any context. And so they're up in this world of forms or something, some other kind of dimension where we can, if we identify with it, we feel more empowered maybe. And maybe that is like, it kind of, maybe it regulates our hormones a little bit when it comes to anxiety and, and just the relief of like, oh, maybe there is something here. And we're never going to get to it because it's a representation of something. It's not real, it's an image. And we can get sucked into that and deceived. And I think, as we see today, a lot of people get sucked into it. It's kind of like a trap in a way, but it makes sense if we look at the potential causes for yearning for this concrete thing that never changes in the first place.
And a recovery of that thing that perhaps science has eradicated, or at least, has determined for the past several hundred years to be, not as useful.
Yeah. Well, of course,
so we cling to these scientific concepts in a way very similar to that of religion, where we idolize them, we pedestalize them, and they become our new God. And it almost seems that God has been turned inside out in a way, where instead of an external God, it's us. We have pride in our own intellect, our intelligence, thinking we're smarter than everything else in the universe because we have these neocortexes that can think in more objective ways. But that might be just hubris, who knows?
Well, the evolution of art and culture would support that also, starting with, in the late 1700s, 1800s with Romanticism, everyone could have an art project for the first time, right? It's like everyone could take stock in their own subjective experience and transmit it into the world, and it would not just be looked at with odd eyes, but perhaps you were a flaneur or a dandy, or your perspective was interesting, or it gave us a new frame to look through, and therefore, we all become sort of creators of our own world in that sense. And I feel like that's run its extent though, because now you look at contemporary art and it is a lot of navel gazing and a lot of narcissism, and I think that's what this text is speaking to a lot of also.
Yeah. Of course, that's the thing. In philosophy and psychology, of course, there's qualia, which is your essence in a way. And marketing departments, advertising, people over the years have learned how to sell to that. Like if you look like a new stadium, those new baseball stadiums, if you don't have that qualia, that essence, you walk in, it's just another stadium. But there's an essence they sell as they're building it and advertising. Say, come to our new stadium, they're selling it to your quiet. They're kind of building you up psychologically. They've learned how to do it very well over the years.
Yeah, it's creating like a group mind, which I think is think it was like Jonathan Haidt, who I remember reading in one of his books, where he called it the hive switch, when it turns on and it feels like we almost get subsumed by some larger mind, and we can surrender to it, so we can kind of relieve ourselves of responsibility and the burden of being an individual. And it empowers us and makes us feel at least temporarily connected to something bigger. And you see this at rock concerts, you see it at church, you see it in baseball games, football games. It's just something that kind of turns on this hive switch where we're all of a sudden, it's like we feel like something larger than just ourselves. And that is a very primal, I think, urge.
It's very powerful. And from a Jungian perspective, that would be the personal unconscious overlapping with the collective unconscious. And yeah, the experiences of music and experiences of ideology and movements of those sorts are very powerful. Yeah.
Andy, have you heard of Jean Baudrillard?
Was he the simulacra and the simulacrum?
Yeah, simulacrum and simulation. Yeah, the hyperreal. You're sounding a lot like what he says. You probably like reading him because.
I've read one of his books a long time ago, but yeah, he was very interesting though. Yeah.
He talks about those things today that exist right now are all fabrications or photo
copies of copies.
But it's been copied so many times that the original doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And that is what abstraction is, being stuck in the images and identifying ourselves with the image. And that becomes our reality, a false reality, but it's experienced as real to us. So in a way, we are in a simulation, not in the matrix sense, as far as I know, but in the sense of like the neurological sense of identifying with something that isn't real, but we experience it as real because we identify so strongly with it, kind of like a fundamentalist, fanatic who believes so strongly in, some supernatural world or whatever. They might experience it as that within themselves. And I think we're kind of all like that. And possibly a complicated civilization like our own, maybe it requires a belief in an abstraction in order to create a common language in which to coexist with one another. We have to kind of prop up this kind of scaffolding, this abstract, like architecture, in order to get along with each other and understand each other, whether it's in economics and politics and just simple exchange of, just expressing ourselves. And that's what culture is in a way. It's kind of like this abstract overlay over biology that we use in order to distribute expressions more efficiently in a more complicated world.
I was going to say that Marx takes pains to point out that the abstract is actually concrete. It's the most concrete thing. Abstraction seems to get a bad rap in these Marxist studies, but actually Marx said that we can't really grapple with forces until our concepts become wide enough and abstract enough. This I always found counterintuitive because he seems to be someone who would emphasize the concrete.
Well, it's like why isn't that like why the Bible, stories from the Bible still hold true, is because they're abstractions in a sense, and they tell us something.
For us to get a hold of our ideological mothers that are constantly producing us from behind and underneath, we have to come up with super thin seeming, super diaphanous, transcendent concepts in order to have critical distance on and contain the things. So if you want to understand ideology, that's kind of it's an arrogant task, because you're saying, oh sure, I can transcend the linguistic, social, cultural, such on the conditions that produce me. So I always thought it was interesting that Marx emphasized the importance of coming up, and Heidegger does the same thing, and Lukács says the same thing. The working class doesn't realize there's like a class subject that's shared among the subjects, but it can never get itself if it's looking at the small and the concrete. Anyway, it's an interesting point, because it wouldn't seem that abstraction looks like an enemy concept. It connotes thinness, insubstantiality, but actually it's the real self. But we just can't get. We're stuck with words like being. It's terrible. It's a real nightmare.
Well, we are caught in our own limited categories of thinking can't refer to it, as the categories. But when we abstract, we assume, going back to Ivan's point of modes of thinking, we assume cause and effect, for example. And that's what a lot of science is built on, and as well as mythology. But this is a way that the mind associates the bits and pieces of reality. We think already in concepts, okay? And you can call them abstractions or even ideologies. We can't perceive bits and pieces apart from already the interpretation, the concept itself. And this is a biological issue. It has to do with the way our perception is.
Yeah, those are hardware limitations. We can't do anything about those. So Hegel and Marx are only interested in the ones that seem to be hardware limitations, but they're actually well-designed, like ruling class ideologies, like the myth of aggression. That's a basic one, or the myth of natural racial antagonism. That's one that people is getting popular again. So yeah, it's true that there are a few hardware limitations, but hopefully the rest of it is nurture, and we can do something about it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anything to do.
Yeah, I think one thing comes to mind is Heraclitus says you can't step in the same river twice. There's a flux, there's a flow to the cosmos. Everything only makes sense inside of its own context. And, if you're going to have any effective understanding of it, whatever situation is going on, you do have to consider like 27 different things. You have to consider sociology, psychology, science, and myth, and law, and economics, and and there's like all these different threads to consider everything, and we do it every day, we do it every hour, we do it when we're talking to people, we do it just paying our bills, we do it just watching television. We don't know we're doing it subconsciously, it's just ingrained in us. But you get a feeling of something that worked before, that it probably isn't going to work this time, like a stand-up comedian or a joke that worked well last night with the audience, tonight gets nothing. And what's the explanation for that? It's just, and that's the same for dealing with your best friend, or it's the same with dealing with your job. If you live life according to a formula, you won't get anywhere. Or a poker player who only plays like a robot, only plays according to the rules. Yeah, they don't do very well because you got to have a feel for what's going on the ground. The truth is the whole, and life is messier. Life is more complex.
When I mentioned my mom's side of the family, my dad's side has a lot of pastors in the lineage, Lutheran pastors. One thing I learned is any church that has two services, an early and then a late, you can never reach the pastor between the services because they're usually rewriting the sermon based on the reaction of the early service. They're doing just what you were saying. So they're kind of gearing it for the late service based on the reaction from the early. Happens in almost any church. We have two services like that.
Yeah. It also, I wonder to what extent do abstractions and ideologies improve over time then? Like a kind of calculus almost that presumably improves, maybe not. But I mean, even to what Ayala said much earlier, the degree to which we can even judge abstractions must improve or presumably improves over time. It's almost like a scientific method to it. If abstractions don't work in the moment, then they fail. New ones, disprove the old ones, and those are the ones we use in the future. I mean, law was not the same 1,000 years ago, for example.
Yeah, I think they need to be fluid, like the Heraclidean River, and they need to be organic, like the earth in which we are attempting to adapt to. So if we were to create a model in the abstract of the world that we're trying to adapt to and survive within, then that model is going to have to follow very similar patterns of the dynamism of the earthliness of everything, ourselves and the world. It can't be concrete and static, because if it is, it eventually will become obsolete, and we will have a terrible map in which to view the world, a really old one with like dragons on it and stuff.
Right. So I guess if I had a question, it would be, to what extent can we judge if ideologies improve over time, or could we?
I often say to people who ask me for advice, here we go. If you like the results you've been getting, keep doing what you've been doing. If you don't like the results you've been getting, change what you've been doing.
So I was just wondering if I'm coming in. I'm sorry. I came very late. I apologize.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just listening for now, but because I came quite late, I had problems getting in, but I just wanted to acknowledge I'm here, and that was that for now. So
it sounds like, the people come up with ideologies that are,
You would have a clear understanding of the better or worse continuum. And then if you're raised in Burma, 500 years ago, you have a totally different continuum. So there's another thing to do after using personal desire as your norm. There's the question of, are my personal desires good norms? And then you're off on the journey.
Yeah, my point about the results are you use that as kind of a scientific method approach. You consider that if you're getting good results that you like, then yeah, you're doing something right, and keep doing it. But that's going to eventually hit a point of diminishing returns, no matter what it is, and you're going to have to change what you're doing continuously. If you look at the S&P I think it's a S&P 500 of like 50 years ago in the 1950s. How many of those companies are still around today? The only companies that do well are the ones that change and adapt and grow and evolve according to the needs of the marketplace. And very, very, very few companies actually do that. I mean, you can, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, but not many. Change is scary. If you've been doing something that you've been doing to a point that's gotten you here successfully, then you're very reluctant to change that. But in life, in a company, in a marriage, in a relationship, you're going to have to change sooner or later. You're always going to hit that point where the drug that you've been doing just isn't giving you the same hit.
Well, the real problem is, the ones that the ideologies that don't change, but they are because they're successful, and so why should you change, right? And those are more problematic than the ones that are not successful, right? Because they're destroying the world, or destroying the environment, or destroying other people, but they're working for those people.
So the question is, successful for whom? And back to the question before, how do I know that an ideology improves? In order to know how it improves, we have to have standards in the first place. which is what I was suggesting before, is find out how do we evaluate ideologies? Are there any standards, such as, I mean, Ivan always brings up thought processes and thought errors or common errors in thinking that can be overcome by rethinking consciousness. But
can I ask, why do we need
but how do we know that religion is successful? For example, that's an ideology you mentioned. Is
why do we need ideology in our life in our social lives? Why do we need, which ideology ever was successful? Which ideology ever helped society?
Science. I would say science.
That's not ideology. That's science.
Oh, science is an ideology.
No, it's not.
Ideology. Ideology just means the background suppositions that you have, that you use when you drink in sensation and make meaning out of it.
That's right.
So pixels are coming in, and you're organizing in a certain way. So ideology is something that you absorbed as a baby. I mean, if, for example, getting spanked it doesn't only hurt, but it also involves guilt and all this other stuff.
Okay, how would you gentlemen, Dave and Scott, how would you call that? Every ideology you called, David, on the beginning ended with ism. What would you call the science? Scientism?
I should have said worldview. Ideology means worldview. But when you say ideology, it lets the listener know that you're going to be critiquing it. So ideology
why wouldn't I critique? Because I don't believe that ideology is correct way to understand our social interaction.
Well, ideology colonizes people and it turns them into people. Ideology is what gives them the meanings and values that they use to navigate and
you don't think that our normal human interaction is giving us the meaning? Why do we need ideology for our human interactions?
Oh, ideology just means the shared assumptions that allow people to interact.
Okay, I would like to interact with everybody on base of our us being as human beings. And why do we need associate with different ideologies?
So Scott,
you have no choice because you're born like Weber said. There's no functional distinction between brainwashing and child rearing. So the fact that you've grown up and that you're speaking a natural language and you kind of understand why things are funny in sitcoms, it's too late. You've already been colonized.
It's a good idea to be consciously aware of all the different ideologies we're subject to. Most of us live in
I'm quite aware, much more than average person. But that gives me the opportunity to disagree with any other ideology which was ever on this planet.
I want to try to clarify, but can we call any unconscious belief an ideology then? Is that what we're saying?
If so, then the majority of ideologies would be based on unexamined assumptions, not conscious ones. But it would turn them into mental objects in which we perceive the world through. And that is going to shape how we respond and act in the world. Whether we know it or not, whether we know that's the causative or not, it's what we see, and then we act according to what we see or what we perceive.
So Andy, so you think that each of us should have one or two or whatever combination of certain ideologies, or that we have it?
No, I think that it would be helpful for all of us. It would actually be like good mental hygiene to practice a kind of metacognitive, ability where we can try to understand why we believe this or why we're sensitive to a particular topic or subject that comes up when we're communicating with other people. And it might not be what they said. It might be a sensitivity that we have unexamined within ourselves. And if we are able to harness that ability to understand where the emotion is coming from, then we can better understand our biases and why we may be triggered by certain things. And I think that would be helpful for each individual to go into their shadow and try to figure out what it is that is projecting outward onto the world, and then thinking the world is this way and this way, but it might not be that way. It might be something that they're projecting outward. It may actually be something, but we don't know until we end up being able to kind of like allow ourselves to think on a more meta level about ourselves. And that means that not judging ourselves, not just pretty much trying to suspend any kind of emotional judgment when it comes to what we feel, but to observe it and figure out where it comes from so that we can better understand what is driving us to see things in a particular way.
Okay, what's the difference compared to what I just said? What's the difference? Where do you see the difference?
Well, I think that no matter what, I just think simply by having a nervous system, we are going to be biased because we have biological biases woven into consciousness that allow us their adaptive strategies. But the thing is, they might serve us in certain contexts, but not all.
So
but
you call ideology?
No, a lot of them are.
There's a further point that it's true that we have biases and we're biological robots, but we have this ability to negate anything. So no matter what your conditions are, no matter what your brainwashing is, there's always this weird ability to objectify and distance yourself from it and say, this is probably bullshit. This could be bullshit. So that's what Sartre called the awesome power of the negative. It's true. And maybe that's some special feature that we have. No matter what the worldview is, we can always kind of get outside of it a little bit to see how ugly it is or how contingent it is or anything about it. So that is
I think in this reading, what it does is expands the common perception of what ideology is. And Paul is right as far as what the common thinking about ideology.
Right.
Yeah, he basically he equates it with abstraction. So every concept that we have, which is tying up any pieces of information together into a meme, into something meaningful, is an ideology. And so that's a way to look at the reconstruction of reality. And as I said, it's woven. You mentioned it's woven into consciousness. It's especially woven into the subconsciousness. What we don't know, what motivates us to have certain cognitive concept to attach. So the only thing we can't really completely control it because the subject we cannot get out of our subjectivity, but we can at least be aware of it and try not to get attached to a certain ideology. I think that's all we can do is not being so attached and investment that we make our cognitive boundaries unpermeable. We need to keep those openings to more information that can change the relationships of the pieces of information we have into maybe some other meaning.
But can ideology change as fast as you need, or as fast as our society is evolving?
A good question.
David, you mentioned S&P in the 50s and now, or for example, abstract of ideology, horrible ideology of Marx and Engels. They come with those horrible ideas in the middle of 19th century, and for 150 years, many countries in the world and many societies in the world continue on the base of Marxism until 1989, until finally it collapsed, because they didn't evolve at all. They didn't. Marx was a very smart man. I admit that, but he never understood that science can provide what much more than what he was thinking about communism, about division of the. He was correct with his dialectic, but he didn't understand which way the world will go thanks to the science.
Well, the problem is that times and circumstances, life is in constant change. So he might have very, very actually brilliant observations about the period that he was in. For example, climate crisis wasn't in anybody's mind. That was industrialization time, right? But today, neo-Marxists have made changes, and there is, for example, Raya Dunayevskaya that founded humanistic Marxism.
Oh yeah, they found many of them, but which one actually did work? I don't know any.
It seems like a big problem is when there's the assumption that I think is a flawed assumption that all humans are like a blank slate and they can simply you just need to figure out how to organize them intellectually into a proper, perfect society. And we aren't blank slates. There are different dispositions that we just inherit. And I think the Marxist model, I don't know if Marx or Engels actually believe this, but there's so many different interpretations of Marxism, it gets really cloudy when it comes to what the intentions were. But regardless, it was interpreted as through or from the assumption that people are just a blank slate, and therefore we just need to organize them like a chess pieces on a chessboard, and we can create a utopia. And obviously that didn't work. The 20th century shows that.
No, they showed that social circumstances have a lot to do with mobilizing certain human qualities. So we have biologically, we have a whole palette, like an artist, a whole palette of potentials that can be mobilized for better and worse and aggressive and peaceful and all that, depends on the social structure and the value of labor and alienation, which is one psychological factor that he did get in. So no, that was not fair for Marx to reduce him that way, I believe. But you are right that he didn't take the factor of power into account at all, what power does to humans. And that, I think, is a big problem in his theory.
All this, the dialectical materialism and the scientizing of it, all that stuff came later. And anyway, in Western Marxism, they only care about what everyone knows at university when they take any economics or sociology class. In fact, if you ever use the word socioeconomic, that's Marx. So all Marx is talking about is that the way that primates organize their power to reproduce their very own culture. So it's like the way the organelles work together to reproduce the infrastructure of the cell determines the way that the organelles think. So that was his radical insight. So the way that humans organize to be able to make stuff like textbooks, school, all that stuff, shapes the way that they think. So that's it.
Sorry to butt in. I got a jet. I have an appointment. So.
God, you know quite a bit about philosophy, but you know that Marx used Hegel's dialectic in his Das Kapital.
That's right.
Yeah. So why are you saying that dialectic materialism came after Marx? No, it was Marx who invented that.
Yeah, well, there's historical materialism and dialectical materialism.
Yeah, historical materialism is Hegel. Dialectical materialism is historical dialectic is Hegel. He started with he was one of the first. He wasn't completely first, but he was one of the first. And then Marx, when he studied Hegel, he took his dialectic and add materialism to it. The problem is he never continued. His abstract, which he changed to other, which he developed completely to ideology, never was changed. That's why I'm saying that in 20th century, socialism, communist countries use system which he invented in middle of 19th century.
Oh yeah, they use the rhetoric as a cover for their state capitalism. But Marx would be the first person to say that because he's a social constructivist, that the theory changes as the humans struggle, the conditions change. Like the famous example, fighting against slavery in Egypt is different from fighting for air conditioning in Los Angeles during the riots. But it's the same type of thing. It's a class of people, and they're in a position where there's a lot of surplus, unnecessary suffering that's engineered, and then they recognize it, and then they usually just go on strike or fight against it.
But main problem with Marx is that he wanted socialized or communalized or make means of production that state would own all means of production, which did happen in a few socialist countries, and it was economic disaster.
That's right. Actually, there was capitalism. It was a nightmare. Fred Jameson's solution is real elegant. Everyone should be enlisted into the army. If everyone goes in the army, we all have our chores, we all have our duties, but we also get medicine and we have food, and there's no homelessness. So that'd be an easy way to do it. Or a co-op. A co-op is an example of actual communism. But all that stuff in Russia and China is not communism.
Well, actually, Marxism was never established. It was what it became during Stalin and Lenin was state capitalism.
It's kind of mutation, sort of.
Well, state capitalism, because the main idea of Marx is not just the ownership of the means of production, but the ownership of labor and owning the value of labor, owning people, and which is the main problem we have in the States everywhere in capitalism, where the employer is holding his employees by the balls. I mean, look today, if an employee doesn't have today his employment, they don't have medical insurance. They don't have health care, right? The wages the wages they get, they can't buy even the product of their own that they produce. They can't afford it. So this is what happened in what's called the communist world, and Mao too was. What did Mao do? He owned all the land. He took all the land and therefore owned all the farmers' labor and wages. So that's not Marxism. It was aberrated.
But they
it seems like there was
a place to bring up ideology, because there's an ideology that goes along with the idea that we have to. You own the land and you own the tools and everything like that, and then you won't let other people eat unless they use it to make stuff. And there's an ideology that goes with that, and that's a very common ideology, which is that humans are naturally lazy and they won't do anything unless you coerce them with threat. So that's just an example of ideology, and a lot of people believe that if unless you threaten people with pain, they're going to vegetate. That's the welfare queen thing. It's a popular image.
Well, you know, the main ideology that is at the basis of traditional economy is that that money is the incentive to get more production and better production, so that as if human incentive, that if we don't have a built-in curiosity and we like to find, we constantly want to find out more, and we have a need to produce stuff, to do stuff.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm. Oh, sorry.
Came out with a new study that shows that the correlation between wage and productivity doesn't even exist. It inverts. You've seen these weird graphs, right? Like if you start paying them more, they actually do less work and they screw off the job because it's a scam. There's no real connection between what you're doing. It's just like, I mean, it's a game. So if I'm working and I hate my job, of course I'm going to try to work as little as possible, and you're going to try to.
Just look at it. For example, in your country or here in Canada, just look at every public employee. More money we are giving them, less they work.
That's just a slight clarification Scott. The relationship between the amount that somebody's paid and then their productivity over time, there's a negative correlation if the work is unskilled or like essential work, like farming, but if you have to think about something, there's a slight correlation, as I understand it. If you pay somebody more, for certain kinds of skilled labor, there's a slight increase. That does drop off at least for I mean, it sounds like Andy would have a much more thorough explanation of this, but there are some intricacies to that I don't want to get into. But as far as ideology in terms of common economic systems like socialism and capitalism is concerned, there is a corollary to some extent between the degree to which capitalists coerce employees to do labor and the degree to which at least Marx proposed, or Lenin, Marx, early Soviet and German thinkers proposed that proletariat dictatorship, coercing the owners of the means of production to give it up. I mean, but there is coercion on both sides. That is an ideology. It's not a value judgment to which is right. I'm just saying ideology on both sides.
Okay, so most of you, what I noticed on quite a few meetups, I thought that it's only here in Canada are people too much to the left, but I noticed on many meetups in the last few months where I am all over North America, that you think that capitalism you will call ideology also, correct? But capitalism is, in my view, not ideology. It's just system. It's just economic system. It's not ideology.
Well, I think capitalism is an ideology because I
know majority of people think that, but it's wrong.
Well, I believe capitalism is an ideology because it doesn't exist. I think it's something people believe in because it doesn't exist. I mean, if you look at the raw statistics of our country, there's a very, very tiny proportion of people that actually own any means of production. It's an oligarchy by any real thorough definition. So the fact that anybody thinks that this is capitalism is an ideology, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and Paul, even money, the piece of paper that you have in your wallet, I hope, is an ideology. I mean, it's just a piece of paper. It's worth nothing without the consensus about the value and the meaning of that piece of paper.
Why would you call it ideology? Why wouldn't you call it economy?
Because your belief informs the value of it.
Right.
That's not ideology. That's concrete. That's the. Now I agree with Andy when he compared abstract and real. This is real. That money is real, except the money which both our governments are printing every day.
But the printing part, the paper is real, but the belief in it that informs the value of it, that's an ideology.
Yeah, they call it
a social construction. The fact that one paper that says on it 1 and the other says 1 with 2 zeros after that is a social construction, is a consensus of people about the meaning of that.
But it's not ideology, it's economy.
Well, whatever.
Maybe a working definition would help. I'll try to find something from the paper.
I mean, if we're talking about value and money is value to the people who use it, obviously, then I would say that it is somewhat connected with ideology. I don't know how you could uncouple it from that.
Yeah, for the
unless you believe money is valueless and still believe in it.
So Andy, you wouldn't call it that it's real?
Well, for the value to be real of a dollar bill, it would have to be able to actually transform itself by itself into a hamburger, into a box of crayons, into
I think it's a collective belief and faith in its value that allows it to emerge as an intersubjective truth, but real in the sense of objective reality, no. But when it comes to the consensual reality that we create through our symbolic associations with the piece of paper and value, yes.
So that's
why how many times, Paul, the dollar has changed values compared to, let's say, the euro or the shekel in Israel is dropping. I mean, every 5 years or so, the money that you had, which had value, let's say, you wanted to buy a gallon of milk, is worth nothing. You can't even get chewing gum with it. So what is real about it?
Well, in some ways, the clearest sign, I think, sometimes that somebody's in the grip of an ideology is when they confuse their model with reality and they start to think that the model is reality itself. So
yeah,
this is one of the dividing lines. You know, if we can look at money and see the social construct, then we have the possibility of being, as a speaker earlier was saying, moving to sort of a meta level about it and not being completely trapped by the ideology. But the moment that we mistake the money for reality itself, it's evidence that we're stuck inside the ideology, because now we can't distinguish our model from reality.
Yeah, there's a brilliant book by Alfred Korzybski called Science and Sanity, and he's the one who's often quoted as of saying, "Don't mistake the map for the territory." And we can use the map, and it can be very useful, but we have to acknowledge and accept that it isn't the thing that it's represented completely. Otherwise, there'd be no representation or models, because we just have the thing in itself. So it's kind of blocks off the world, but in a way that is useful for us if we apply it in a way that does give us benefits. But we can't idolize it as like more important than the thing itself, because then we end up having a mismatch between our models and reality. And that seems to be why abstraction can be a problem, but it doesn't have to be a problem. It's all in how we relate to it and how we understand what it does, what it's useful for, and why we even abstract in the first place.
Okay, can I ask, maybe because of, as you all can hear my heavy duty accent, what you mean by word ideology? Is ideology concrete, exists somewhere concretely, or is it something what the way to get somewhere? Is Marx had ideology and concrete Marxism, which was in Russia or Soviet Union, was that concrete or was that ideology?
Well, it's concrete because it lives in neurons, and it's actually entrained. So the people get up and they do the same things every day, and those are material forces. Their muscles go to work and they do things there. So it's embodied in matter.
He called his ideology materialism. Okay, so materialism can be an ideology as well, an idea. So the difference ideology comes from the word idea, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, that it's from idea. It's what from idea. So why are you all talking about money? That it's idea, but we all agree that that dollar has value now. But we agree now in 2020, certainly that it was more or different value had 50 years ago. We all know that. But in the same time we had done. It's
maybe the point would be that money, the thing, is a real thing that has volume and mass in the world, but the amount to which we value that is ideology. So like the amount of trust in a dollar directly affects what it's worth. But the money itself, that's a very real thing. It's our thoughts don't change that it exists. It's just its value. That's the ideology. I think, is that clear?
It's measured. I mean, when we think money, and it's very important, significant to us, we think as what it can buy, not about a piece of paper or what's yeah. So what we can buy is something that is agreed upon, and it varies from society, from even town to town or state to state, time to time, it changes.
Okay, but is there any other way we could value anything than with money?
Yes. Yes, throughout most of human history, people did not use money for economics. You can count the number of societies that use cash nexus as their methodology for measuring economic value, because only some of them did it. Most of them did not.
Yeah, and trade in simple society, trade was the economy.
Okay. And accumulating money.
Do we live in those do we live in skyscrapers and beautiful houses, or do we live in caves?
Look, nobody said that right now, nobody found a better way, or at least shared the ideas that they have to come to fruition. But we need to understand that the construction of reality here, that money is a concept, and that if a government deals with debt by printing more money, how it really hurts you, because what you worked for and saved is worth much less. You can buy much less for it if they print another 10,000 or million.
Or more.
Yeah.
Trust me, I am 100% against printing money. I think that the government shouldn't give anybody anything for free. And I know that majority of the people on the meetups, both in Canada and US, are for that governments should give everything for free. And the majority of the people agree with the help which government is giving because of the pandemic and all that stuff. I am completely against that. But I am in a huge minority against that, because I think that I know the value of money. As soon as we are printing money and giving money, the value of money is going down. And because
so you agree that it's ideology?
Yeah, but giving money is ideology. To deal with money properly.
No, the money itself, the whole idea, the concept, money is concept. Is not a piece of paper. The same piece of paper you can use for writing notes or whatever. But the fact we call it money is there is a whole ideology that comes with it.
Yeah, probably, Ayla, you got me, even that I don't like to admit to it, but yes, money, the concept of money is ideology in action. Yes, I have to admit to it.
And to recognize that ideology isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. Science
it's
is
just not neutral like an idea. An idea is neutral. You can have an idea, but an ideology is kind of something that has you in a way. And that would be the difference between the two.
I just hate all that concept of ideology. I know because of the printing money, and that we are basically a society living on the loans. That's the ideology. If we as society wouldn't have the loans, I wouldn't call it ideology, but I have to.
That's a great point.
Of MMT and all the system in monetary policies.
But I think that goes to the point that money is ideology. I mean, look no further than the stock market for proof that the difference between money, the ideology, and money, the piece of paper, is wildly different.
Yeah, but stock market has at least certain value. What we are printing doesn't have the value.
I guess you could call it like a primary and a secondary value. So that the primary value would be like that of the paper itself without any symbolic associations attached to it, just the paper. And then the secondary would be the ones where we apply abstraction to it and we create, a different value that is like kind of a level in abstraction. And so there's like different layers, I guess, of value. Maybe that would be more.
Didn't Nietzsche have a system like that? If I'm not
sure.
Nietzsche had
but it would make sense because there's the material plane and then there's the intersubjective plane that we all share when it comes to trying to create a language that we can communicate with each other when it comes to ideas and value. And so the very simple primary value is just the physical things in the world, but there's more of like an attachment to it when it comes to, okay, so this means this, but you don't know it means this until it's described and it's explained in the abstract and it's collectively agreed upon as it being a truth. And that's a much more complicated set of values that only humans can, as far as we know, can fully grok. And I think, and so when it comes to talking about value, maybe just understanding that there are different levels of value, then we can maybe not get too stuck in semantics, I guess.
Right.
But the way I think about the stock market, value is here today, gone tomorrow. That's how I think about the stock market, and it has value to some and to a few, and not much to most. This is based on the product. The whole stock market is based on the production of nothing.
Right.
So there's this fascinating discussion about this in this essay that we're talking about. And he talks about, I'll just quote a few sentences here. It's right apropos of what we've been saying. By nature, conventional or artificializing animals, we proliferate in thought, word, and social forms, our own microcosm of customs, or world within a world. Nowhere on earth are human beings found devoid of culture. We exude this noosphere of fictions, myths, a priorist beliefs out of the darkest, most inexplicable inner necessity. It's he's talking here about the way that we can't stop culturing. We can't stop sort of projecting interpretations between ourselves and the world. The interpretations are the handles by which we grasp the world. And the danger then comes between recognizing, do we understand what we're doing? Do we understand that we're voluntarily doing this thing driven by inner necessity? Or do we mistake what we're doing for the reality itself and start to think that we're not dealing with models? If we start to think that we're not projecting part of ourselves between us and reality, if we start to think we're seeing reality exactly as it is, that's when we're the most in trouble.
Yeah, I like the concept of the noosphere. It was a Jesuit priest by the name of Teilhard de Chardin who came up with that. And he likened it to kind of like how you have the atmosphere and the troposphere, and these are all connected to the ecology. And the noosphere is like kind of another level of mind, another dimension that is still affecting and relating and constantly, in a symbiotic relationship with the ecology, the physical world. And so mind is actually shaping the physical world in all sorts of ways. Obviously, we can see when it comes to, we live in like the Anthropocene where, and we are pretty much a geological force, on the planet. And because of mind, because of this noosphere where we have like this collection of ideas or memes or beliefs or assumptions, and we act according to them, according to ideologies, according to conceptual models that do impact and have a relationship with the physical world.
So the classical work on social construction of reality, I put it in the chat, was written the first time in '66 by Peter Berger. And I really recommend it because it's a classic enlightenment of both from philosophical and religious, sociological point of view as to how we do that, what you just described, Andy. And
Thank you.
Can you say the title again? I joined late, so I don't have that part of the chat.
Social Construction of Reality by Peter Berger. There is a co-author, Lucas something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like the way he talks about the relationship. Kenneth Smith in this essay talks about the relationship between fiction and factory and facere, that we're making things, and that it's easy to get distracted by the physical things we make and to think that that's fundamentally the most important thing we're making. But when you look more deeply, you realize that we're making all these fictions that we're thinking about the world through. And as a result of those fictions, we create all the material phenomena that we take as the result of, as the primary result of what it means for human beings to be a maker.
And our mode of making is one of the things that we make.
Yes. Meta.
That's Marx's whole point, is that in the end, humans are responsible for constructing the culture that makes humans.
Overall, I had a negative response to the article because he sort of rages against analysis and science. But that's really where all of our wisdom is.
Right.
Oh, no, not all of our wisdom.
This holism, like, let's say you say, okay, holism is better because, well, it's not, right? How are you going to prove that it's better? How are you going to assess it? The only way you're going to assess it is by abstraction, by statistics, by some sort of measure, or else it just sort of reduces to what felt to me like a sort of anti-intellectualism, where this is just, oh, I like this better, right? I mean, I think it was absolutely brilliantly written. I mean, it's amazing prose, but every time I looked to try and, at any particular point he was trying to make, it seemed like, well, how would I test that? How would I know that that is true beyond, you know, it sounds like, wouldn't life be easier if we could get rid of some of these analyses and abstractions and things? You know, we know, like, a classic case might be BMI, like body mass index, right? There's a measure of health. It's not a very holistic measure of health. It's not even a very good measure of health if you're just talking about physical strength or, you know, or amount of body fat, for example, right? But it's a thing that people can get caught up on, like, oh, I really got to reduce my weight for this reason, right? So that's an example of something where you came up with a metric, you did an analysis, and you gave the metric too much weight.
Exactly.
That's a real problem, right? That's not what I sort of read out of this article. What the article seemed to be even more almost anti-intellectual by saying, like, science and abstraction and all these things just get in the way. We've got to get rid of them. We've got to go back to some holistic.
Well, wait, I didn't necessarily pick up on that, but I kind of gleaned that he sort of saw society as missing that scientific approach, or more scientific approach, to the way that we understand reality. And I mean, I'm unsure as to whether to call it a treatise on, you know, like trying to pursue that, but I don't know if he felt negative. I think he certainly felt negatively about the way that we understand the world currently, but I'm not sure that he didn't think that we shouldn't try to. Like,
well, it more than negative or positive, it's like an observation which can serve as a warning. So I'm a pragmatic person too, and that's how I like to use ideas. After criticism, what's wrong and what's the obstacles, let's see, so what can we do with it? And science seems to be to provide us some tools that are better to know, as far as epistemology, to know where we live, was even to know ourselves. And what the article can caution us against is something very important too, which is too much certainty, too much arrogance.
Yes.
And that's how science can evolve and become more accurate, because it's not perfect, obviously. And so I think it's useful to criticize science, not just to criticize it for the sake of criticizing it, because there's something probably more clear that we just don't have access to yet. But it is a way of opening our imagination up to other possibilities of trying to understand the world. And I think that is very useful. And I think that's why the arts can be just as useful as the sciences in a way, because they deal with the subconscious. And that opens us up to things that our conscious analytical minds may not have access to. And I think they serve as a proper balance too, between the seen and the unseen, and between the mental language and the body language. And I think that, and that's why I don't think science is ever going to have an all-encompassing understanding, because it is limited to a particular dimensionality of consciousness, which is very useful, but it's not everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. Few people are as science berserk as I am. I'm bananas for science. I'm an intellectualist by nature. But I really welcome Smith's criticism of science. He points his finger at a number of things that when we are worried about Trump, when we're worried about flat earthers and anti-sciencism, we sometimes overreact and have a tendency to deny that there's anything wrong at all. It's just a perfect, well, ideology, right? We overreact, and we slip into thinking that there's no room for improvement, nothing could possibly be wrong. But in truth, we see all kinds of things that are wrong. for example, how much of the research that happens is designed to raise profit versus designed to expand the frontiers of knowledge? If you're a scientist working in the field, where does your funding come from? Which things are funded and which things are not funded? What if you produce a bad study, but if you manipulate the data enough, it seems to suggest that a drug that's going to come out really would have a positive effect, and now you get FDA approval and you bring in hundreds of millions of dollars. There are enormous distorting influences going on in what we think of as science. And our problem linguistically is that we don't want to name the system that results from that. We don't want to say that that's science. We want to say that's some distortion of science, and let's not name it, let's not talk about it. But it happens every day, over and over and over in the way we do science. So at some point we have to ask the question, isn't this science as it's practiced today? Well, isn't the actual real world science different from the science that we're striving to achieve?
You know what? The problem is we are mixing different concepts here, science with capitalism. A lot of the science, especially, let's say, the climate denial, even pandemic denial, is supported by scientists. So people mitigate the science, which is kind of has very, very strict criteria. And they are usually today, to do any meaningful research, you need funding. And who are the funders already have a lot of influence on the agenda and the results. So, but that's not the science, this manipulation. See, we have a great tool, but it falls in the wrong hands and it's manipulated. Then it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't act as science anymore.
Well, this is what Smith is criticizing here. He's saying, are we guilty of the no true Scotsman fallacy? When we say that when science does good things, it's science, but when it does bad things, it's not science. Aren't we just trying to evade criticism by doing that shell game of definition?
Just to be clear, could someone please point to the place in the article where he criticizes science? I honestly don't know where that was.
So he mentions it in a number of places. In the section that we were just looking at on ideology, just a couple of paragraphs down, he talks about nature reigns in a subliminal or covert way. Let's see. Oh, just flipped up here in front. Let me.
I mean, there definitely were a number of places where he talked about science, but I don't know if it was in a strictly negative way.
No, see, that's the thing. Is if we're not used to having science criticized, we can respond more strongly than what he means here. He is definitely trying to criticize something important, but he's not saying, so let's all go back to the trees. That's not at all what he's saying. What he's saying is we have a tendency to look at the world in these unbalanced ways where we're either overly intellectual with no reference to values and morals and what should matter in the world, or overly emotional in terms of how we feel and what satisfies our appetites. And we tend to pretend that those are the only two things that we should be concerned about when we're making decisions about how to run the world. And he says there is this third element. This is implied throughout his work, which is, what are the long-term consequences of our actions? What's the teleology? What are things driving towards? And if those things are negative, then we can't justify doing what we're doing either in terms of how we feel about doing them or what our ideological systems of thought say about them. We have to be concerned as well with the consequences. So if science makes it possible to do a more perfect Holocaust, as with the IBM computers that were used to catalog Jews for the death camps, then we have to be able to hold it accountable and say, what was it about the belief system that those IBM engineers carried in their heads that made it possible for them to think that was okay to do?
Right.
Well, I think any useful tool of finding of knowledge, human knowledge, has two sides to it. Humans can use it or abuse it. Today, medicine works on AI. AI is very useful for disabled people who lose not just limbs, but their mind even. And at the same time, AI can be really used against humanity. So, you know, we have to distinguish between criticism of science itself, Rick, and human behavior, or why are we abusing a way to know or a discovery in such a way. And what you mentioned before is not criticism of the intrinsic axioms of science, which are ideology. Okay, or you make a test and you test things, but you always start with some axioms. So those are the ideology. But what you mentioned is the funding, and the funding is, I see it as a mark of capitalism, that money owns what you want to, how you want to affect the world, what you want to find, where to look.
Right, yeah, to break this up a bit, I think that there are at least 3 different ideologies at play here. There's science, capitalism or economics, and then our morality or our value judgments on them.
Right.
But those are at least 3 different things. And I think that we're talking about the interplay between them. I'm not sure what the trajectory of this, the teleology of this conversation, to use a Rick word, but.
Yeah, part of what he's trying to explore is, for example, does science have something in common with capitalism in the way that it abstracts the world? And do those 2 things have something in common with the way we go about our legal system, which again abstracts the world in a certain way? You know, abstracting in a certain way, especially when it's about divorcing it from consequences and saying, well, it's not my fault that the Nazis used my computers to, make it more efficient to exterminate Jews, even though I sold it to Nazis. That's not my fault, because I was doing pure science. And so nothing that could possibly be a consequence of my actions matters. That's on them entirely, not on me. And what he's saying is that a valid position? I mean, yes, many people assert that it should be, that knowledge should be, the pursuit of knowledge should be seen as completely independent from the consequences. But he's pointing out that itself isn't ideology. The belief that we should be able to abstract away the consequences and divorce ourselves of any accountability is ideological. Even though we treat it as objectivity and neutrality, but that treatment is itself an ideology.
You put a question there, if capitalism has something together with science. So what is your answer to that? Does it or does it not?
That's his critique. His critique is that they do have something in common. They have his critique is that they have
that's why we have science so high. That's my opinion. I disagree with many. I agree with the last paragraph which he put there, like regards freedom. That was very good. Then the end I liked. Before that, he was all over the place, by my opinion. But anyway, what is your opinion? Do you think that capitalism and science, modern science, goes together or goes against each other?
Well, it depends on what you mean by goes together.
His argument in this, they work together. They are in symbiosis.
His argument in this article is that what they have in common is that they're compatible ideologies, because they both argue the merits of disentangling questions of the long-term consequences from the immediate choices that you make. So in capitalism, you do what generates the most short-term profit, or if you happen to get a more far-seeing capitalist, he might think about medium-term profit. Almost never long-term profit, because we're mortal and we don't last that long. So we're not capable of analyzing at that level. And so too it is when you say, well, I've discovered this cool way to do nuclear fission, and we could use it to make power or bombs or whatever you want. And so what do we do with it? Well, who's accountable for the behavior? Who's responsible for the behavior? Is it legitimate to say, it's not my fault that all those people died in Bhopal, India, because I was just trying to maximize my profits at the corporation that was responsible? Is that a legitimate argument?
There is a basic difference, though, between science and capitalism in the way that capitalism is man-made, is artificial, whereas science is natural. We are all scientists, even as children. When we look to find, we experiment. I mean, play is an experiment. When a baby keeps dropping things from the crib down to see, they learn about gravity. And you can't stop the need to understand and to understand correctly, which means to find patterns and rules of not rules, but patterns of events. So you can that's the abstraction. You can't stop abstraction because that's a natural way. We humanoids were born that way, and you can look at the general consequence apart from the small, the separate events as, without continuing to understand and surpass boundaries, society will get stale. We will not get anywhere. So it's for the good of society to continue. And if you look at most of the discoveries, let's say in medicine, penicillin, whatever, they were found by accident.
Yes.
The main hypothesis was not to look for a cure, but they were found through looking for something else.
So I want to add the concept.
Okay, you said that we are all scientists. So I just remember from 2015, from the speech of your former president, Barack Hussein Obama, that when he said that science is done, because 98% of scientists say that climate change exists, so science is done. So is he scientist or is he not scientist? Just question.
Why do you call him Hussein Obama? Do you have
that's his proper name?
I know, but do you have you have an issue with that?
No. Why is that illegal to call Barack Hussein Obama? Is that illegal?
No. I ask about your attitude, not the legality. Let's go on. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, you should be sorry. If I call somebody full name and that is almost illegal, that's like in my former communist country where I came from, that somebody would call that illegal. How close
your
is
attitude was harsh, though. That's all.
Yeah, it's a little bit harsh.
Attitude is horrible. So we will sue people and we will put people down by their attitude.
We're allowed to talk about each other's attitudes, but let's go ahead and set that aside. I think Ivan was going to say something, right?
Yeah. I was going to talk about epistemology, right? That when I think about science, the word science can refer to multiple things. It can refer to the results of scientific inquiry. It can refer to the culture of science, which is sort of like this social institution, which generally rewards people gives them social status for creating long-lasting results, like long-lasting knowledge, right? Papers that get cited frequently and for a long period of time. But then there's also science as in an epistemology. If we're talking about ideologies, I consider myself a Bayesian, right? And science approximates Bayesian epistemology. And so it's a way of finding out things about the world, right? That's what I like about science. In economics, you could say that free markets are a way of finding out about what people want, right? It's a way of setting prices based on demand. Now, there are epistemological questions, and then there are value questions, like if we take this tool of free markets and just say blindly, we're just going to rely only on this to get us where we want to go, then you're going to run into problems, right? So it seems to me that if we don't separate out the epistemological value of these ideologies from the value questions, from the normative questions. I mean, there is a very high level normative question as to should we be rational? But I'm going to presume that we all agree that we should.
Yeah, that the epistemology of both science and capitalism create a phenomenology, meaning like an experience, a personal experience of reality. And the phenomenology of science, you can, through the scientific method, requires a split between subject and object. And in order to gain objective understanding, you have to transmute experience into an object, which means that it turns into something within our awareness, within our frame of reference. In order to understand something, we have to turn it into an object. But does that mean that everything is an object, or is the phenomenological approach that we take within the scientific method require that in order to remain within that realm, within that understanding of the world? In order to understand something, it almost seems like we have to objectify it. And with capitalism, I see that it can, the phenomenology of that is when we look at the raw material of nature, it's turned into an object as well. Like looking at a tree, oh, that's board feet. That can be converted into lumber or into some kind of product that we can sell and mass produce and make money off of. So that's a particular way of looking at the world, and I think that that the epistemology of it, I think, ends up almost creating a new relationship with the world, and that has severe implications, as we can see with climate change and things like that.
Yeah, I think about, for example, the Exxon emails, in which Exxon's own researchers concluded that continuing their business model might destroy the climate of the planet, in which the executive said, but that we're okay with that. And the reason we're okay with that is it's not our job to save the planet. It's our job to maximize return on investment for our shareholders. And we can rationally do that for now, even if everybody dies later. That's okay. They literally spelled out the equation, which is that because they had abstracted what they could do from the question of what they should do, they were able to justify doing what they could do that they should not have done. Ivo, when you mentioned earlier, should we all be rational? I was surprised to hear you say that, because science is not about being rational. The Greeks were rational, which is why they proposed all kinds of reasonable sounding ideas that were false. And it was during the Islamic Golden Age later that the empirical method was developed, when people tested Aristotle and other Greek writers and discovered that countless of their widely accepted rational arguments turned out to be false when you subjected them to experiment. So the great beauty of science is that it subjects reason to empiricism. But that might have been what you meant. Maybe you just didn't say it that way.
So the word rational has been used in different ways throughout history, right? I'm not referring to Cartesian rationalism, for example. I'm talking about Bayesian rationalism. In other words, inductive rationalism.
Sure. And I'm with you. I'm a huge fan of inductive rationalism. Where I get into trouble is, it seems to me that what Ayala described as the instincts of a child that we're born with, we leave fairly quickly. We become more and more habitual creatures rather than experimental creatures. And you can see that, for example, in the way adults consume the products of science. We read articles about science and we get excited and we share, hey, look at this great discovery. But we ourselves are not conducting any science. That age left around age 2 or 3, or sometimes people can drag it out just a little bit longer, but pretty quickly we stop experimenting and we start gossiping about science and what we think it means to us. And that creates a distancing between what we think we're doing when we think we're doing science and what the scientific method would actually require of us.
I'll add to that and say that if you think about it, almost all of our skill at inductive reasoning is learned before we ever get to school.
Yeah.
We don't teach people Bayesian analysis in school.
No.
It's not standard. In other words, we don't teach people to be rational in school. We do show people deductive proofs. So if you were to describe what deduction is, they would all recognize it and know how to do it.
Yeah.
But induction is something that is very rarely taught.
That's right.
Well,
that's right.
I'm with you. Just to clarify, I only know Bayes from mathematics. You know, the probability of A given B is the probability of B times A all over the probability of A plus B. But that's conditional logic in math. I don't know what the relationship is between those two definitions, but and so maybe if you could clarify that for me in terms of philosophy. But moreover, what was it? I mean, there are a lot of things that we don't teach in school that have kind of different for example, everybody innately knows trigonometry. If I throw a ball, I just kind of intuitively know where it's going to land, but I don't need to know I still need to learn the quadratic formula to be able to express that in a different context. So this idea that we know, you know, deductive reasoning at birth or even language at birth and that we're just sort of accustomed to it doesn't necessarily mean that we understand everything about it or that we can't express it in different contexts.
Sure.
Among people that study rationality, Bayesian epistemology is, if not the gold standard, it's something approximating a gold standard. So when AI designers think about building an ideal reasoning machine, they create Bayesian networks.
Yeah, I do that. That's the Bayes I'm talking. Yeah, that's
right. Well, so most people, there are a number of cases where, like in critical thinking, we try to break things down into simple pieces with the expectation that once it's in its simplest form, and we've got like these sort of atomic fragments, we'll be able to see that this atomic reason is correct. Like we've broken it down into such small pieces that any flaw will be obvious. But it's not obvious because people don't know how to reason at an atomic level. So you can break it down and be a critical thinker and yet not see a flaw because you're not using something approximating Bayesian inference.
That's fascinating. So are you saying that breaking things down into their smallest component parts is something approximating a truth? Or are you saying that it's in the opposite direction, that there are systems for describing those blocks? Is it, I don't know, do you build a triangle bottom up with small pieces, or do you describe a triangle top down with like angles, I guess is what I'm saying.
I don't know that it's like the way that it depends on how you want to apply that analogy, I suppose. But either way you do it, you're going to construct an argument for some conclusion. And when you are criticizing an argument, what you're going to do is try and break this argument down into pieces and find the assumptions, and then work it down into its simplest steps, so that if there's a flawed step, you would be able to see it. You'd be, aha, you've made this bad assumption, or A doesn't follow, B doesn't follow from A. But we actually don't teach people to reason inductively at that low level. So someone can have the evidence before them and still not be able to understand that this step is flawed.
What part of it is innate? What was the word you used? That is learned before we enter school. What part of that?
Oh, okay. So how do we know when how to update our confidence in a theory based on the evidence that we're given? Right.
Yeah.
For most of us, we just do it completely intuitively.
Right.
And it works. Confirmation bias is one of the terms that that might come up. You
Yes.
probably seen those tests where they're given cards and they're like, which card do you turn over to verify this theory? And most people will choose the wrong card.
Right. Yeah. At least in mathematics, there are several different ways of analyzing Bayes, but one of the most common ones is the continuous Bayes formula, which is obviously you update the a priori at every step. So, I mean, that's what you like is that kind of approximating the human notion of this? Is that what you're saying?
So human reasoning sometimes approximates Bayes, but it doesn't always.
Okay.
What I would say is I have my dice here.
D20. D&D player too?
That basically, I have 2 dice here, 6-sided die and a 20-sided die.
Yeah.
Right. I pick one at random and I roll it. I tell you, I got a 2.
Mm-hmm.
Which die did I probably roll?
Well, probably rolled a d6, probably.
Yes. But the reason that it's probably the d6 is that there are lots of possibilities on the d20 that aren't on the d6, and the data is consistent with the d6.
Yeah, 1/20th versus 1/6.
Right. Well, yes. So this is an analogy for how we know literally everything.
Right. Yeah. If I remember correctly, Bayes tried to use this to prove the existence of God.
Yes. He failed, obviously, but
yeah, plenty of philosophers failed that.
A noble attempt. Some things have to be tried.
What I'm saying is that this analogy is literally how we know everything, right? We would not know anything if we could not apply this same rule.
So when you're trying to come to grips with Kenneth Smith's position about these issues, he would say that what you're describing is reductionism, that the truth is in the smallest details and needs to be built up from there. And he would argue that that's modernism's prejudice. Modernism is very focused on, we go to the small details and we work our way up. We take things in isolation from each other and we build truths from them. He says, but the problem is that we're not gluons. We're not quarks. We don't live our lives at that level. We live our lives in the middle, in which we're enwrapped in truths that derive from the smallest units. Yes. And you need all those tools you're describing. Yes. He's not saying back to the trees, but he's saying the big blind spot of reductionism is that we are also caught in larger truths, that it would be impractical for us to try to build up from small pieces because you have to pass through too many layers of abstraction on the way there. Right. You think about, for example, in biology, say, let's talk about cellular biology. On the one hand, there is a modern emphasis on trying to deconstruct cellular biology into being just about atoms and molecules.
Right. Or this is a big thing in computer science specifically, because there are a lot of algorithms that are non-deterministic. In other words, their starting conditions, even if you know them perfectly, perfect information, cannot be used to even predict later states.
That's right.
Right. So
yeah, you and me will.
thinking on them in 2 modes is literally essential to understanding some system.
Yeah, I work in medical software, so I'm right with you. Computer science teaches us that there are limits to what you can build up from small pieces, that there are many, not just hypothetical truths, but actual real world necessary everyday truths that cannot be built that way. And the reason is because we simultaneously occupy multiple scales of order at the same time. And each new scale of order in the cosmos, it contains more rules governing it than you could ever conclude from the small parts that built up to that scale. Right. There's what's called emergent order.
Exactly.
Emergent order. As you get to new layers of abstraction in the complexity of the cosmos, new rules seemingly come out of nowhere from very complex waveforms among the combinations. And those things defy analysis. And it could be possible that someday We could make computers fast enough to work up 1 or 2 or 3 levels of abstraction, but we're in dozens of layers of abstraction, the level that we exist at. And so if we insist on always going back down to the bottom, most of the real world questions that we have to be able to ask, like, should I drop this bomb on Nagasaki? We are not going to be able to answer by insisting that the small units are the only real units and that we must always build up from them. So as a result, we need, this is the punchline. I'm not just trying to talk over you. The punchline is, as a result, we need to be able to look at the truth from multiple layers simultaneously and not treat one of them as more privileged than the others. We need to use each of them for the strengths that it has to offer us, but not let it become the master over our minds so that we stop acknowledging that the problem is bigger than just this piece that it's good at solving.
It's wonderful. Very well said. Thank you very much. It's wonderful.
First of all, I wish the author had written exactly that.
Yeah.
Because that would be comprehensible. I don't, phrased in those terms, I don't have a problem with that point of view. But when I read, and I only read this, I just joined the meetup group and I just read this chapter, so I'm just getting a little sliver of what I assume is a larger work.
Sure.
But it seemed to me that no matter what, let's suppose you want to answer that question, should I drop this bomb? On what grounds can I make that decision? Apart from just going to, how do I feel about it? Well, I can look at it I can frame the question in different ways. I can frame it by looking at the amount of money that I'm spending on the war, the number of lives on my side versus their side. Or I can look at it from the point of view of an individual that might be living and working in the city and what their experience would be. I might look at it from about how I feel. But in order to answer any of these questions, apart from just introspecting on my own feelings, if there are any facts there, they're going to be scientific, right? It's not a question of I'm using atomic theory to try and figure out how I should feel.
Well, in what you're describing is what he's criticizing modernism for. Specifically, the assertion that either things reduce to abstract, mathematical, logical, scientific, analytical information, or it's a chaotic free-for-all of feelings and perspectives. And that those are the only two possibilities. He says that's not actually how reality works, but that is how modernism models reality, that there's no third option. Nothing else real exists that we could use as a basis for discussion other than one of those two things. He says, in a nutshell, that's what's wrong with the modern order, that it has excluded a whole third area of information. And as a result, when it looks at complex situations that involve value judgments and ethics, it tends to collapse them down into facts and feelings, as though that's all that could be there, that could be considered. And that is not the way that people have thought about the world since people began. That is unique to the modern order, that we have deliberately purified our systems of thinking about the world to exclude any other possibility, so that it's only one of these two things. So in the Middle Ages, people didn't reason that way. In classical Greece, they didn't. In Islam, they didn't. This is part of when we're trying to understand what is the distinctive fingerprints of the modern order that make it not some kind of end of history or purely objective view on the world, but actually make it an idiosyncratic culture that one could look at and go, wow, that is definitely modernist. He says, in a nutshell, that more than anything is what typifies us, that we reduce it to one of those two things.
Well, I gotta go. This was also my first meetup. It was wonderful to meet all of you bright thinkers.
Likewise.
Oh,
Likewise.
I really
Thank you.
enjoyed what you all had to say, been listening to you. And thank you so much for all your contributions.
All of you. I very much look forward to more meetings, including the one tonight at 10. And yeah, hope you guys have a great evening. I gotta go though.
Hey, see you next week.
You too.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye.
What kind of meeting does he refer to tonight?
The Heidegger meeting. It's on the calendar.
Oh,
Heidegger.
yeah. Gonna skip Heidegger due to personal hostility, antagonism.
Although Heidegger is actually making a lot of the same point, that we're better off having a balance of Apollonian and Dionysian energies and the limits of the rational abstractivist mentality. If we want a fuller view of the human experience, limiting ourselves to rationalism and abstractivism is less than optimal. We could do a lot better by including alternate forms of knowledge or gnosis, art, music, science, poetry, and love, ethics, things that science doesn't and shouldn't comment upon.
Well, this is not based on ideology. It's obviously resentment when, for him getting a card for the Nazi party, where he didn't depend on his survival, but it was for his career. And that resentment is in the way of me absorbing his deep ideas.
Oh, we don't shy away from that. We're going to discuss that as well.
Yeah, I didn't realize before last week the relationship between Hannah Arendt and Heidegger. I was just reading about that last week, and I was very surprised that the author of The Origins of Totalitarianism and Eichmann in Jerusalem had a relationship with Heidegger. I'm still, it may take me a few years to fully absorb the emotional impact.
Oh, I have had this struggle for a few years, but I didn't get 1 inch progress. I didn't. I don't know. It's a mystery. I think it's the ability of a philosopher like Arendt to get beyond her subjectivity.
Yeah, I'm going to have to read more and learn more. I find it very unsettling. But as far as the topic at hand, I can see why Ivan was not particularly thrilled with this specific essay, because this is not an essay in which Kenneth is attempting to strike a balance between what we might call the intellectual, the emotional, and then the principled, the excluded third dimension. This is specifically going after, this is a criticism of abstraction and how it lends itself to ideology. So especially in the modern world where we are not used to hearing science criticized in this way, it's extremely uncomfortable and unsettling, at least at first, until one grows comfortable with kind of the existential reality that science as it exists today tries but fails to live up to its own ideals because of the economic and other circumstances it finds itself in. This is where I alluded earlier to the shell game of the no true Scotsman fallacy. Well, when does it count as science? Is it science when Exxon's paying you to come up with proof that climate warming isn't happening, even though you absolutely know it is, so that you can delay legislation on petrochemical industry? Or is it only science when you're on the other side and you're the one criticizing the petrochemical industry and pointing out that the consequences are going to hurt everybody? And our problem is that, the model we have for understanding it is that one of these things is real science and the other one is like fake science or corrupt science. That's what we're taught in school, that if you're compromising the ideals of science, then it doesn't count as science. But what Kenneth's criticizing is that it's so easy to do that to science, because science says I will steer clear of ethical concerns. That puts scientists in a position of, can we ensure that all scientists have been properly ethically trained so that they would never lend themselves to misleading the public with fake information? What are the dangers of unleashing a human being upon the world who's not committed to ethics, but who is handing out these powerful tools of knowledge to whoever can afford to buy them?
Well, I'm not sure that training them is going to be sufficient.
I agree. You're right.
Yeah, there is a system of survival here. Again, I'm going to capitalism.
Yeah.
But look, I look at this dilemma, ideology and science, same way I look at the elections. For me, I will vote by default for the less of two evils. We live in an imperfect world. We don't have a better tool than that.
I think someone once said if you boycott vegetables from every country you disagreed with politically, you'd starve.
Right. Right.
We're compromising every step of the way, somewhere along the way.
But certainly the applicable part, I think, that we can take away and apply almost everywhere is the idea that our abstractions and models of the world need to be our servants and not our masters, and that we have to be aware of the way in which, when we intellectualize, we make ourselves vulnerable to inverting that relationship and becoming servants of our abstractions, at which point they really become ideologies. It's a hazard of abstract thought. It's actually the thing that I like best about science is when science is in its mode of hands in the dirt, collecting lots of information about the way the world actually is, and then trying to infer conclusions from that. Because I find that the more we increase the balance of concrete reality in our thinking, the more it gives opportunities for reality to act as a check upon our otherwise sort of hazardous abstracting impulses. It's like the difference between citing Will from earlier, coming out of university with a computer science degree, and then they unleash me upon the VA to start applying what I think of as computer science to the algorithms and software that they're trying to use to treat patients. And I make a great mess because I don't have any experience of the real world. I'm just full of these abstract ideas and theories about how it's supposed to work. And it's not until year after year I'm able to confront the consequences, often negative, of my attempts to apply my abstractions onto the world that I begin to learn the difference between theory and reality. And that gradually makes me a better programmer and less prone to flights of abstraction.
Although if you are employed by the VA, they would like you to suspend your judgments quite a bit and to do what you are instructed to do.
Well, the nature of medical software is that it's so complex that you can't use a traditional manager-employee relationship. The programmers have to have a lot more autonomy and make a lot more decisions. And so it creates more scope for creativity, but it also creates more scope for error. And it was in that way that I was able to discover the dangers of abstraction in my own life, contrasted with concrete reality and the evidence of doing something over time. It led me to really appreciate master carpenters and master potters and really anybody who engages in a craft over a long period of time, the way that they develop this idiosyncratic understanding of the real world from that kind of hands-on experimentation, Ayala, that you were talking about, that we're all born doing, and yet later we sort of drift away from, most of us. But people who are lucky enough to have a career where they can do that for a living for the rest of their lives, they carry more of that. It's like, what is the difference between what everybody thinks wood is and what this actual piece of wood in front of me is?
Rick, where are you coming in from?
Sorry, what was that?
Where are you located? Where are you coming in from?
I'm Seattle.
Oh, also Sheila.
And you?
Austin.
Ah. God,
it's nice. It's nice to see people like you, Rick, that put a lot of thought, before thought, after thought, during thought into their the work and how it will impact other people.
the feeling is mutual.
I wonder if that actually is descriptive of kind of the missing link that we're talking about. Just that compliment right there reminds me. I've been trying to kind of square the conversation in terms of both science and maybe even art as well, because I think the same issue applies. It's sort of like what's the difference between good art and bad art? Maybe is closer to what's the difference between good science and bad science than we think. And I guess in my experience, the part that does seem to separate in my mind is that consciousness element. It's like along the road of production, whether it is the art object or the scientific, discovery, there's the material outcome. There's the thing that, like, look at the beautiful thing I made, or look at the amazing discovery I just stumbled upon, and look at the value that it's going to bring to culture. Look at the value that we can derive from its existence now that I've done this. And then we pass over this part that is, well, okay, now that we're looking at this and we can see it, what did you become conscious of along the way? And what did you think about? And what else is there that we're not seeing, so that we're not blinded by the thing that we think we're looking at, in a way.
Right.
And I see that, and the compliment right there was like, I appreciate how much thought before and after you put in. And I feel like, for me, that's the heart of it. I don't want to ruin it with other words, but
yeah, it's come up a couple of times here in the conversation, the question, how do we make sure, or how do we put a check on our ideologies? How can we be sure we're going in the right direction? And I come back to my answer. I think a lot of it has to do with interrelationship, interpersonality. We put our checks on each other. If we're only isolated, quarantined in our own minds, we just spiral in on ourselves. You can't see your own blind spot. You need an outsider's perspective to be able to put a block and a different spin on what you are conceiving as or perceiving as the case. But yeah, you're too close to it. You can't see your own blind spot. You're a patient operating on himself.
it almost seems like that's the critical point where it becomes a belief, and a belief that sits in isolation. It's not connected. You start to cultivate this belief about the thing that you've done, that if it's not in check with others, then it's going to take on this whole other ideological or fictional sort of element that may have some truth to it, but it's probably not the whole truth.
Yeah.
So,
well, as far as studies on effective problem solving, any problem, survival problems, more science problems, always competition underperformed cooperation. And that's why, most successful big corporations use this brainstorm time to start, and then put by each computer, I guess, or in each team, more than one person to work together. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be specific, in creative in creative environments such as, you know, advertising firm or in-house creative shop, you know, you actually have roles that are defined like this. You have the art director and the writer. You have one person in charge of images, the other is in charge of language. And they get together, they work closely together, and they brainstorm. And they, you know, a lot of the roles often overlap, and there isn't any clear definition once they're talking, but it's that, I guess, synergistic sort of conversation that bouncing ideas off of one another and something coming out of it. It's pretty exciting, actually, in terms of the creative process, because it's not just happening in an abstract world, it's happening shared and connected.
Right. It's you know, the 7 blind men around the elephant, describing the elephant. So once you get them together, then you can get a real understanding of what an elephant is, or as close as possible.
Well, yeah, that's one of Kenneth Smith's core themes he comes back to over and over and over, is why it's so vitally important to bring multiple perspectives to the problem so that we don't remain prisoners of our own ideology. And, you know, Darren, what you were just saying a moment ago about the process with the art, with bringing the different people together, you know, that's exactly how we make our best medical software. Is it's just not safe to have programmers making all the decisions about what the software will look like, because they're not the users. They don't know at a concrete, tangible level what are the most pressing problems that need to be fixed in the software to make it better tomorrow than it was today. The only people who know that are the ones who are using it, who are being blocked over and over. And it's their irritation that becomes this great gold mine of information about, so that's what we should fix next. That's the thing that needs to be dealt with. But conversely, the users don't know how to write the software. They don't know how it's engineered. There are many things that might abstractly seem like it should be easy to do, but maybe the software is written in such a way that that's actually a very hard thing to do. But there's another easy thing to do nearby that they wouldn't have even imagined because they don't know the internal structure. And so you get what we call the golden pair working together. And between the two of them, experimentally, they can find the best path forward over and over. But it's so often, it's not something that either one of them could have thought of by themselves.
And isn't that interesting that I used a copywriter and an art director as a comparison, but of course it's migrated to an engineer and a designer.
Yeah, right?
You know? Yeah. Yeah.
Polyperspectival.
It's just another language.
Yeah. Yes. So I just had to mention it because I was so excited by what you were saying.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's an interesting essay because it criticizes a thing that we don't normally think of as something you're allowed to criticize. And frequently, we don't even think that that's a thing at all. We take for granted our powers of abstraction as merely a tool. We take for granted the idea that they don't possess us like demonisms. Our very model of the human mind is so influenced by computers. We think ideas are things that we have, and they could never possibly have us. And so the whole inversion he's doing here, which although he doesn't quote it, it really is picking up on Audin's "We are lived by powers we pretend to understand." You know, the idea that that we have to be very cautious about what we do when we're thinking and very skeptical of ourselves really flies in the face of American pop culture's idea that what you need is confidence. And whoever has gumption and get up and go and confidence and initiative and the entrepreneurial spirit, that's the person, you know, who will fix problems in the world and make things go. And how many Disney cartoons do you see where the theme of the hero is he just really wants things more than other people do, and through the power of his desire, you know, he can change the world for the better. Whereas here's Kenneth Smith going, I don't know, man. that might be the worst possible thing.
Well, that's the construction, the social construction of reality, we have to assume to go on with life as a society, as a community. We have to make so many of such assumptions unchecked, such as that there is a free will. Okay.
Right.
And we talked about the money. With all the categories that make so much difference today in protest, race. I mean, that there is no biologically distinguished so-called race, gender, and the ones that really are skeptical and bring those questions to fore, and the skepticism is neuropsychology and somewhat social psychology. But in neuropsychology, which is a field that I'm very interested in, I'm a psychologist. You know, you learn about the construction of even who we are, the self. I mean, today in neuropsychology, they know that the self is a construct of a certain assumption that we made of the I, which is assumes continuity and unity. And whereas really the self is a story that's built by different neural system, and most of them don't even talk to each other because they don't have language. You know, I don't want to go into that, but the idea is that we live by certain myths or ideologies all the time that we can't even afford to question.
Yeah. Yeah, you're putting your finger right on it. I mean, there's the juicy stuff. It's yeah, how many people respond defensively against the idea of self-criticism because they have invested so heavily in the I that they imagine they are, when they don't understand how much of themselves is unconscious. They don't even know who they are. How could they get so defensive about what's going on down there in the unconscious where they're not really aware anyway? But they are, because their model of who they are doesn't allow for whole tracts of their beliefs and feelings and behavior to be happening without their conscious volition.
Yeah, most of the time we defend our image, not who we are, but the image we reflect to the outside world. But like animals, in a struggle for, let's say, either survival or sex, animals present a certain detailing. You know, even smaller animals can. It's very important that their presentation to the predator has a lot to do with their chances of survival. I know that the mice that my cats here sometimes catch a mouse, and the mouse has different strategies of presenting to the cats. They are twins, so they come from both sides. The poor guy, you know. So the first thing that he did was he puts his arms and hands up as if he's going to attack them. He looked very aggressive. When that didn't work out, he played dead. He kind of got on his back and didn't move. But once they lost interest, you know, he got up to life and so, you know, that's very important for survival. So we learn to defend our image by all means.
Yeah, it's interesting because most animals have such a stronger sense of who they essentially are, because they have so many more instincts at work in them. And our path to evolution has so evacuated us so that we have a much smaller set of instincts that we're born with, that it leaves us rocking back on our heels as far as who we actually are. That intensely, and Kenneth Smith alludes to this early in this article, that intensely mimetic quality that human beings have to fill in the blanks that are missing in us. That other animals have. You can travel anywhere in the world, and wolf culture is wolf culture. You can identify an individual wolf. The wolf can have its own thoughts and feelings and life experiences, but you don't look at it and go, what on earth is it doing? But with human beings, what on earth is it doing is almost the first question you ask. The moment you look at anybody that you're not familiar with, you're like, why are they doing that? And it's because the scope of latitude for human behavior is so much less leashed to a coherent frame of instincts that we have less intrinsic, identifiable, distinctive behavior, except the act of mimesis itself. The capacity to abstract and become other than what we were a moment ago. We can whistle like a bird, and then we can get down on all fours and run around like a wolf the next moment, and then we can stand up and quote Macbeth. It's like our range is so extreme.
But through evolution, do you think we have lost that power of instincts? I mean, you can't say that. You wouldn't be able to, I don't think, say that about cavemen or Neanderthals and all these people, right? I mean, all these people, right? So what you're saying, Rick, is that we have lost that quality over the years of evolution. Is that what you're saying?
Well, use it, use it or lose it goes to.
You use it or lose it. Okay.
Right, but what I see people as mainly different than animals is in their ability to mediate their experiences, which we call consciousness. So they are who they are. They act in ways that they don't think about their thoughts. We do all the time. In fact, what Darwin said once is, most of our thoughts are about other people's thoughts of our thoughts.
Yes.
And we don't have mouse or rabbits or tigers or lions writing poetry or painting, drawing, doing paintings and whatever. So we spend our time perfecting, improving other qualities, though, don't you think? So you can't completely completely, what do you call it? What is, I'm talking to you, Rick, based on what you just said.
No, what you say makes sense.
Credit to the human race.
Yeah, that we're mediating our experience, like Ayala says, that we're, rather than being the work of art, we have to paint the work of art. Because we never feel entirely at home in our skin. There's always this kind of itchy need to mediate reality and to distance ourselves a bit. Shakespeare wrote about this. I mean, I guess it's little appreciated among moderns that Freud read Shakespeare voraciously, and even wrote about Shakespeare as a source of much of his early theory. Because Shakespeare just flat up says people are natural actors. All the world's a stage. Right. And we're just actors. And we thought he was just being poetic and waving his arms around to fill the time because that's what we would do. But no, he's saying the thing that makes people distinctive is that we take on roles. And there is a sort of a lack of center to us that a tiger doesn't have. A tiger doesn't have the problem existentially that we have. The tiger is the tiger. But we never really totally feel like ourselves. And so we have this craving for culture and for art.
But when you look at a baby, the first, let's say 3 or 6 months of its life, the baby probably, I would think that when I think back on my own child, a baby behaves kind of like a tiger or a rabbit or other animals. But as they grow and as they evolve, maybe they become what you're just saying. They wear a mask, or they don't feel comfortable in their skin, as you said. But when you look at a baby 3 months or 6 months, it is completely happy in their own skin, in their own environment. And they're absolutely ready to absorb everything that they can, soak it all up. And they're wonderful. They're wonderful. And then all of a sudden, as they grow, especially through their teen years, they become much more complex and insecure and kind of what you're describing about human quality is, I'm thinking maybe starting from teen years.
Yeah, it that quality in us unfolds over time, as you're saying. And this was one of the things that Desmond Morris observed about human beings. He talks about the evolutionary strategy of giving birth to effectively giving birth to a fetus, giving birth early to an undeveloped child. So you compare us to a chimpanzee, and a chimpanzee infant is more fully developed at birth than we are. In fact, almost all the mammals are more fully developed than we are when they're born. And so if you compare us, child to adult, to other species, child to adult, what you see is that we retain into adulthood qualities that other species have as infants, but that they lose as they mature to adulthood. We preserve immature traits into adulthood. He called that neoteny, the evolutionary strategy of evolving by giving birth earlier and retaining infantile traits later. So we have less hair. We never fully develop the hair that our ancestors did, and we never fully settle into a behavioral pattern, but instead we sort of remain curious. Some part of the infant's learning mode survives into adulthood in us, in a way that it doesn't in other species that kind of are born closer to ready, if you will. It's like we talk about how marsupials are odd from our perspective because they give birth so early that the newborn Joey has to climb into a pouch and stay in there and keep developing for a long time. It's like not ready to be born, but they do that strategically, and that's what we're doing compared to the other mammals, but in a different way. Our brains retain the plasticity of infancy a lot longer. And so one of the side effects of neoteny is that some of the things that are going to develop as basic features of the species aren't present at birth. We're not done unfolding. And so the mimesis kicks in a little later. And so does the language. You could sort of, right, as a parent, you must have noticed the difference between the utterances that your newborn made compared to the stage when all of a sudden they caught fire for listening to the words you said and trying to imitate the sounds and saying the sounds over and over. There's like this moment when it begins to unfold where it's like now they need language and they want it and they're driven for it and they start chasing it. And of course we're stuck with that for the rest of our lives. We want to talk, we want to listen, we want to understand. So there's this unfolding, right?
But so many of us, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, how absolutely adorable they are when they are so undeveloped and so innocent and so the babies I'm thinking. And yet as they grow and as they develop, their personality much more is developing, and they become kind of an adult to start to show other quality. That's when you start having more issues, maybe conflicts, differences of opinions about things. And but how we, so many of us, absolutely adore babies, when they're so innocent and so naive and so undeveloped. Yeah.
Probably pretty important for the survival of the species, considering all that we have to do for them.
So we want murdered. Yeah.
Yeah. But it got me thinking about the challenge of having a sense of identity when core to your identity is that you don't have a sense of identity, but that instead you're constantly imitating and mimicking and watching each other and learning. And I was thinking about, I was writing the other day about how you get together with somebody who really loves a movie that you love, and how often people start quoting lines from it at each other. It's like it's not enough to say we like it or to intellectually appreciate it or even to emotionally appreciate it. We have to become the movie. We start slipping into the role of the actor. It's oh, I told you she would never consciously betray the rebellion. We start doing voices. We might even gesture. And sometimes people will talk about how much they love a passage of the soundtrack, and they'll start humming the soundtrack at each other. You can rev up other human beings who are fans of the same thing really easily.
Oh,
Do
well,
you see?
does
You see
Nat
how?
speak? Does Nat speak more about how social animals that we are? I mean, can you think of other animals, maybe dolphins, how human beings crave socializing?
Sure.
And yet you see a tiger or a lion in a forest sitting there alone, perfectly content just being there alone, but then, well, I guess there are certain animals, like elephants seem to be pretty social. Um, um, but then there are plenty of animals or insects. I don't know if you would want to include insects, but the other species who seem pretty content um, not socializing. So that is also interesting about human race.
Yeah. It tickles us so much when we see another animal that is that's mimetic like we are. I mean, it's part of what people like about parrots. It cracks people up that the parrot will imitate voices and sounds because we imitate voices and sounds, and most animals don't. My cats might try a little bit, but mostly I don't do something and then they want to do it too. But if I go to the zoo and I stand outside the monkey cage and I do something, some of the young monkeys will walk up to the glass and try to do what I'm doing because they share that mimetic drive. They want to imitate.
Really?
For its own sake, it's rewarding.
Well, and I think it's deeper than that. I think there's something about the creative impulse. I mean, the Greeks, or Aristotle or Socrates, I don't know, talks about mimesis being at the heart of creativity and of art. And it makes me, when you were talking about this unfolding earlier, it made me think of this thing I heard about what we do when we sleep and we're dreaming, is that literally there are proteins within our mind that are folding themselves, because during the day, this is how I envision it anyhow, I'm not a scientist, but they're chaotic and they're moving around and they're getting disorganized. And then when we go to sleep, our body and our mind is folding these proteins back in order where they need to be, and in order to start the day again. And so it makes me think about, well, maybe part of our motivations in our evolving consciousness is to actually reset and start the day as a fresh, as a new, as a baby, as a child, to discover again what perhaps is useful to us or meaningful perhaps. And so it just kind of, all of that is synthesizing as I'm thinking about like mimicry and how we perhaps enjoy that game or that interpersonal relationship. Look at us playing together. Look at us performing or mimicking a role that we've seen together, and therefore we're learning together, and therefore our consciousness is evolving and it's being validated and verified at the exact same time, which, there isn't that lag in like, oh, I read something really interesting, I'm going to go tell my friend about it and see what he thinks. It's like you're in dialogue. There's something really, really immediate and if you can tolerate it, very gratifying about it. And perhaps all of that's happening at the same time. And I like that.
Yeah, you hear from Broadway stage actors or British Shakespearean actors, that feeling they get on the stage in the moment, right in front of a huge audience, when they're totally being the person they're trying to be, how alive they feel, how completely tuned in, and all parts of all their cylinders are firing. It's just like there's something in us that feels desperately alive when we're doing a perfect mimesis.
Well, I can identify with that. I've been on Broadway and I've done several off-Broadway plays.
So you know.
No.
Sorry?
So you know.
Yeah, I can identify with that. When you feel like when you're absolutely in tune with the audience and you're one with the audience at moments, not all the time. But.
Well, there's an interesting, and it's more anecdotal, I guess, but Alan Alda became very interested in this sort of the inability of scientists to articulate and communicate what their findings are, and how that was a problem in academia, and so he started this improvisational network where he's using acting and theatrical prompts to get these people to actually perform their communication. So that they were embodied. And so I forget where it's out of at this point, but I just thought that was a wonderful blend of, the arts and sciences working together and in order to, to
I didn't know
Darren,
about that.
You're not an actor, Darren?
No, I teach art at the university, but I work across disciplines a lot. And so I talk to scientists and I talk to people that I have nothing in common with. And I really enjoy, I really enjoy it. So.
Hey, Darren, we talked about Dada last time.
Yeah, that's you. Okay, yeah, I recognized your voice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you, I think one of us will have to send the other an email. So here, I'll put it in the chat. I'll put my email in.
Yeah, I tried stalking you online and I couldn't find you.
Oh, I'm on Facebook.
I don't do Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I don't do Facebook either.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, I'll send you mine too.
I lost the chat. Oh, here is the chat. Okay.
So I wonder how many people on this call have seen the television show by Alton Brown that's called Good Eats. Because what you were just describing makes me think of his approach to explaining the science of cooking in Good Eats, where he's like, if he figured out early on that if he just uses words and abstractions, his audience doesn't really understand him. But if he starts pulling out craft materials and making sock puppets and things and, having the yeast burp to generate the gas that makes fermentation, then literally everybody remembers. And then suddenly his lessons about Maillard reactions and fermentation and all all the viewers get it. The performance suckers them in. And also the playfulness of it, the permission to revert to a more playful learning mode instead of having to continue sort of the deadening role of abstraction and distancing.
It's like where personality and story really come back into the fray and become really useful.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But mimesis or mimicking each other, psychologists believe that this is the main socialization and learning instrument, whether we know it or not, even using the same language. I mean, getting dressed.
Right.
There is and the language changes all the time. And now there is internet language that unknowingly, I remember that I had some resentment to starting every sentence with actually. Because it's kind of, okay, so what we said before is bullshit or what? But I found myself using the same language and actualizing a lot of my conversation, like it or not.
Isn't that the same as using the word yeah. I mean, there's somebody who does philosophy very often. He just uses the words every other word is you know. You know who I'm talking about? You know who I'm talking about?
Uh-oh.
Oh, okay. Well, if you do inner philosophy, especially Austin philosophy discussion, you'll know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's a thing about playfulness in philosophy that you see in Nietzsche, and that you see in Kenneth Smith. I don't think see it in this essay unless you know Kenneth. If you know Kenneth, you can read this essay in his tone of voice, and so you know when he's smirking. But in the rest of the book webs, I think his playfulness comes through more clearly. Like, God help us, in the essay, F Kafka and F Zappa over espresso, which I don't think we've talked about on any of these yet, where he took the lyrics to a Frank Zappa song and interspersed them with Franz Kafka aphorisms, and suddenly it seems like they're having a conversation, and of course it's completely ridiculous because, bringing the two perspectives together, but also somehow sublime. So that idea that philosophy shouldn't just be stuffy and dry, but should be playful, and we should play with knowledge and play in our relationship to our ideas and the world around us, is something that I think is also very core to Kenneth Smith's ethos around philosophy, but I think in many of his writings it doesn't come through unless you already know it's there.
And it's the same argument as with science. Science has value. We talked about it before, not just for the heck of it, of doing something, but that understanding and finding more information is useful for society in the long run. And same with philosophy, it just makes you think a little deeper and a little longer, and maybe provides you better tools to go in the, not to go in the wrong direction. I can't say go in the right direction because I don't know what it is, but not to make too many errors or to correct errors.
Yeah, that would be going in the right direction or wrong direction. That's the whole point of making a judgment call, that you identify a right direction and a wrong direction.
Well, we know Ivan is an expert on that, and he just wrote a book that's going to be published about those errors of that we make in thinking, and we maybe don't always know the right way, but we certainly know the wrong way. And like he talked about confirmation bias, but there is like building a straw man, okay, generalizations. All those we know sways you from the issue at stake and are made to win an argument by information that's totally irrelevant to the issue.
Yeah, I really wish in school, sorry, I guess I was a little loud there. I really wish in school we taught, there's two fields I think ought to be taught, frankly, in kindergarten. And one of them is logical fallacies. I wish every single person could just rattle off the top of their head the names and descriptions of some of the most common logical fallacies, because that right there would sort of put an end to about half of politics in America. And then, the bad half. and then the other thing that I wish that we taught was psychological defense mechanisms. Projection and compensation and compartmentalization. These are just the basic building blocks of how many people deal with reality, and yet they don't have the words for them. They don't understand what it is that they're doing when they're doing it.
That's bottom line. Bottom line, Rick. Yeah.
I mean, what if everybody was fluent with both of those things? How different would the way we relate to each other be in America today?
You ever go to 4chan?
No.
It's not pretty.
You're saying they need these two things?
Oh, I'm saying there's no. I'm saying there is a place. It's called 4chan. Check it out sometime, where they are very conversant and fluent in exactly the way you're talking about, and it's ugly.
Yeah, you're right.
They use it against each other?
Yes. Well, sociopaths are known to be mind readers. They're very, very good at, and some people mix empathy with the theory of the mind, but they understand how human psychology works and they thrive on it.
I see what you mean. It's being used for predation and
Yeah, but and also the non-malevolent. The issue is that information about a lot of stuff is much more accessible than ever today. If you really look for it, if you have the internet, of course you have to weed through and find different sources and check them, but still it's available. I mean, I don't know if I could live without Google today. However, we tend to do, because of the power of those subconscious defense mechanisms, they're more powerful than rational thinking. So people don't, people, and I include myself in that crowd, we don't always ready to accept and apply them to ourselves. Quite often. Yeah.
Right.
So that
I absolutely, I absolutely identify with that. Especially with quarantining and living in isolation, I cannot imagine living without Google.
Yeah.
I'm looking up something every 10 minutes throughout the day, you know. So
yeah,
I feel like I'm a slave to Google.
Well, when I was a kid, it was the encyclopedia that I always had open, and I was always taking notes from. I used it then much the same way that I use Google now, and I think for some people, it was the library, and they would just spend a lot of time at the library.
Yeah.
But
It was that.
And so some of these, I think some children, even millennials possibly, they don't even know what an encyclopedia is, I don't think.
And you know, the encyclopedia, the dictionary, and the library. Who needs a dictionary today?
Oh, I always have a regular paper dictionary whatever room I am in usually. So
it's easier to just, you know, click on Google Translate and here you go. The whole chapter, not just a word, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you feel a slave on the one hand, but it's also liberating.
Exactly.
I even had an old-fashioned Yellow Pages Yellow Pages book. I just threw it away about a month ago, but my son kept saying, "What are you doing, keeping that outdated Yellow Pages?" You know, so times have changed.
You know, it's part of what's interesting that's going on in the world today around the internet is, you know, people complain about the internet as causing all kinds of problems, but I think part of what's happening is prior to the internet, it was much easier to preserve the illusion that everybody else thought the same way you did. And the more people are compelled to acknowledge that other people exist and think differently than they do, for some people that's exciting, but for a certain segment of the population, it's enraging. They don't want people to exist who think differently than they do. It makes them very, very angry. And they're pushing back, trying to stop it all. You know, it's like if you should all think the same way I do.
No, it's interesting observation that.
Yes, yeah.
It's I think for people who can acknowledge that their own ideas are models and that more perspectives are good to have, the internet feels like a blessing. But for people who are completely trapped within a single role and a single perspective, the internet's a threat because it's calling into question their whole idea about what it means to be human and to think.
Very interesting observation.
I have no idea where it's going, but I mean, this is what I see in the way people behave on the internet.
Huh. Rick, do you do Facebook, Rick, also?
I do. Yeah, I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
You're seeing that issue around masks, aren't you, Rick?
How well you know me. Yes, yes.
Rick, do you mind if I look you up on Facebook?
Please do.
Yeah.
How come you're not showing us your face, Rick?
Although your name is so common, both names.
Yeah, I on Facebook I use my middle initials, so I'm going to put those in the chat. And that's not common. I think I'm the only one on Facebook like that. The reason I'm not showing my face today is my internet's down. So I'm currently going over my phone as a hotspot, and I don't want to burn through everything with sending video.
Yeah, you know, I lost the Zoom page. I can hear you, but I lost the page, so I don't have the. Okay, here, I got it.
But we're scheduled to have our internet back next week, so I should be showing my face again next week.
What about you, Ayala? How come we can't see your face, Ayala?
Oh, it's a bad hair day.
Oh, well, I'm having a bad hair day, but I don't care. Well, I'm only showing half of my face usually, but other than that.
Yeah, let's see the back of your hair. I'm kidding.
There's not much to see.
Fair enough here.
I put it up for you, Rick.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, hi, Ryan.
Hi, Jimmy. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I can see about this much of you.
Oh, yeah. Here.
Yay. Maybe that could be visible here just for the tail end of the call. It's it won't be too scary on my data plan. Hi.
Oh, well, it's working all of a sudden. Well.
Yeah, I just turned it on.
I promise to have a picture next time.
Well, if it is the tail end, we could consider what we wanted.
She's not going to play.
What we wanted to do next week. I had the idea either if you remember, Rick, Extinguishing Ethics, which covers what we're talking about, the specific ideologies of Christianity, capitalism, and science.
That would be great.
Either that. Well, okay. Well, look. Okay, let's just go with that one then. Fine.
Oh, you guys all know each other? Are you all in Seattle area? Oh, I see.
We're in different cities, but David and I know each other well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually in Boulder, so.
Ah.
Yeah.
Boulder.
Yeah, we're getting smoked today. So the wind decided to blow down from one of the fires, and there's no danger. It's just can't go outside without inhaling a lot of smoke and.
Oh.
You need a different mask now.
Yeah, my niece is in Boulder, Colorado, and I keep telling her to join in philosophy discussions. She's working on her PhD in Boulder, Colorado, doing atmospheric science. She's doing atmospheric science.
Okay.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
We need more. We need more voices.
That's right.
You know, we have also brush fires here. I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's really a problem. They said that they wouldn't have control of for maybe 10 days. We need rain.
Yeah, and we need climate change back the other way. But that would take a concerted effort on behalf of the whole civilization working together.
Yeah.
A
good organization. It's not even organization. It's an assemblage. is Extinction Rebellion. And we have a chapter here, and we try to, you know, sound all the warning with civil disobedience and all that. But we encounter a lot of resistance, and from progressives too, because it's very inconvenient not just to talk, we don't talk about climate change, but about the sixth extinction, which we are already in. And so we are called a bunch of pessimists.
Yeah, with everything going on this day and age, I can't think like that. I just cannot think about those things. I'm sorry. It's too nerve-wracking. So much going on right now. And this is why sometimes I ask myself, why are you doing philosophy discussion when things are so depressing and so such stressful times that we're living in right now? But
I want to say I am so very glad to have this discussion because everybody else wants to talk about current events, and it makes me
you do have a point.
It makes me sound terribly elitist when I say great minds discuss ideas, mediocre minds discuss events, small minds discuss people. And that's just with friends. It's like, okay, listen, at this point, I don't care who wins. I don't care. I do care. Let me just say that I do, but I can't talk about it anymore. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you know what? Like I tell you, Ryan, I try to, you know, there are certain philosophers that are really removed in time and space so much that I gave up. But a lot of the philosophy that we are discussing, for example, what we deal with now, the reconstruction of reality, is really very relevant. And at least myself, you can say that I have constructed an ideology for myself that connects all those dots, connect all those events that are happening now.
Diamond Bosworth, FMUMC. One moment, sorry.
Yeah, so for my, I don't know if I can change, I probably can change a bit, I can't make a dent, but at least when you have an understanding of how all those events can connect into a bigger picture, I think it's helpful to at least to survive.
There's I can't remember who he's quoting, but Kenneth Smith quotes a philosopher who said, "The owl of Minerva only takes flight with the fall of night." That people get more philosophical when the fundamental premises of their civilization are in question because things are in collapse. It makes them finally start asking questions about things that they always took for granted before, but now they can't take them for granted anymore.
It was Hegel.
So, Hegel, thank you.
Another way of putting it is there are no atheists in a foxhole.
David, what do you do for a living?
I always get asked that. I never know how to answer that.
Okay, how do you put bread on the table? And don't tell me you take it with both hands and, okay.
Well, you know, no, I mean, okay, the straight answer is I do a lot of different things. I do some web design, I do some writing, I do some teaching English online, just a variety of things.
Mm-hmm. You are looks like what do you call it? An intellectual, the Renaissance man, something.
A jack of many trades.
We were talking about earlier. Yeah, I am old enough to remember what things were like before the internet, and I spent my childhood in the library. Yeah, just absorbing everything as much as I could. If we didn't have the internet and Google now, yeah, I would get a lot more books read. I know that.
I had to write a program for my dissertation because there wasn't any, and which was such a task. I'm so bad at it, but we had only one computer room for the whole university, and you had to make an appointment and get 20 minutes at a time because there was a long list of people that you can use. And it's so much easier today. But, you know, I think going through all of this and it does kind of make one more curious.
Yeah, best thing about philosophy is the questions it makes us ask that would not have occurred to us before. So, David, remind me again, which one are you talking about doing next week?
Well, it's one of the dramas of the mind.
Ah, yes.
Well, two of the dramas of the mind. There's Extinguishing Ethics 1 and 2.
That's it. Thank you.
The retail method and the wholesale method, or the wholesale method.
So every Monday
go
you
reread
take.
those.
So every Monday you tackle a different subject, different person. Is that what you do every Monday?
Yeah, the Mondays are sort of a Kenneth Smith extravaganza. He's got this enormous body of writings, and it's not very well known. So we're sort of hopping from one Kenneth Smith thing to another from Monday to Monday.
You want to do something else? I'll take suggestions.
Sure. Oh, that's a great one. Dramas of the Mind it's a really good introductory Kenneth Smith series.
Yeah, it's the first thing I said when we started this is I wonder, you know, how do you present Kenneth Smith to people? Where's the beginning point? And there truthfully is no real good beginning point. You just have to dive in. If there is a good beginning point, like as you said, Rick, yeah, it seems like I'm favoring Dramas of the Mind. I don't think they're the best. I just think they are a good groundwork to lay for newcomers. You know, are they the meat of everything Kenneth talks about? No, but they're probably the best on-ramp that I know of, at least for beginners. You know, I mean, just to get some ground, you know, cobblestones laid down before we start constructing anything larger. I don't know if it's working at all. It's probably not, but at least that's my idea.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and the discussions have been fascinating. I'm looking forward to watching the YouTube videos of your Millennia and Microcosm series on Kenneth, because that's another one that I would have thought was a reasonably good entry point because it has such a coherent focus. But as you say, he explores some of that in Dramas of the Mind, so that might be the better place to start.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap between what we're doing here and what we're doing there. Yeah.
And then do you let the discussion go as long as it does? You don't have a set time in when it begins and when it ends. Is that the way it works also, David?
Why would I have a set time? Why would I? What's the benefit? What's the value of having a set time?
Oh, okay.
How does that gain anything? Putting a set time on it?
Well, very kind of you.
A peace of mind.
Yeah. Through a certain psychology, it would, but
yeah. Well, you know what happens now during the pandemic, and to more people than myself, is there is today, the day before today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the structure is so broken that it's unsettling. And go ahead.
As I've been saying this whole time, this has changed my life, not in the slightest. This is exactly the way I've been living for the last 20 years. It has no effect on me whatsoever.
That's because
I understand most people can't say that. I just stay at home anyway. I wish I had been for 30 years. I just stay at home. I never go out.
You also live in Seattle?
No.
Southern California.
Okay, so you go out in, I mean, the world is more than people and concrete, right? There is.
Well, I go to the grocery store when I need to.
Well, I don't mean that. I
Go to
mean
the bank when I need to.
trees and other forms of life, the humanoids, like nature.
If you have friends and family and you actually have places to go, I don't. So then it's pretty easy for me.
I see. Well, I know. Yeah, you have some friend. You have Rick, I know, but
I'm going to step out of this, but when I come back, I want to see if you guys are still going when I come back.
I think we're about wrapping up for today.
Oh, you are? Okay.
I don't want
a couple of times I've participated in some of these discussions, and I see this person named C.A. Joe, but you can call me Joe. I have never seen his face. All the times I have seen this this photo of an ape, if you want to call it.
I don't mind. Anybody who just wants to listen, that's fine. I do that a lot. So I don't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I like to see faces. Maybe because I'm an actor. I don't know. But,
oh, you are. I promise to show my face next time. And
there's no requirement.
Oh, no, I know that, but since you know, just to be social.
Yeah.
And I think it is important. It's, you know, the Unabomber wrote a manifesto. Do you remember him? You remember with the letters, with the bomb in the letters? Yeah. So he wrote a manifesto, and I got hold of it. Somebody sent it to me in written, you know, in the typewriter form. And I read it, and at first it's kind of a longitudinal manifesto. So it starts making a lot of sense, especially for environmentalists, because what he is on us humans for being inconsiderate and narcissistic about using the planets and resources and each other. But as it goes on, it becomes further and further removed from reality, whatever reality is, and from human feelings. And I know a little bit about the history. So when he moved into the forest, you know, total isolation, he still had, at first he had his brother, then his brother removed himself from him, and he had a girl, a woman friend that came once in a while and cooked for him or whatever and talked. But he was, you know, I guess they call it today Asperger or what, a Harvard graduate, a very brilliant guy. So he alienated people. He didn't have the social grace to keep a friend and so forth. And as he got further and further into his isolation, he also lost the human taboo that most people have before they become soldiers, I guess, which is a taboo on killing people, not for a reason, at least. So, yeah.
Well, I've been observing David for over a decade, and so far I haven't seen him slipping into violating the taboo against killing people. So I'm hopeful about his future.
No, it's just I'm sorry if I implied that, but
No, I was deliberately drawing the connection to be annoying. No, it's interesting. It's interesting. I've not read the Unabomber's manifesto, although I was curious about it.
I admire him. I mean, I admired him then, and I still admire his perception and intellect at the time that nobody else could relate to it. That was before environmental issues came to the fore, you know. And maybe he did the rational way. What he tried to do is eliminate politicians that were he perceived as the enemies of life, not just humans, but life.
Well, I think he's made the mistake that I think was it William S. Burroughs who had the criticism that about the bull and the red flag and the sword, and politics is to teach you the red flag so that you'll be distracted by the wrong things. And I think the politicians in America are the wrong things. It's the people who buy them.
Yeah.
Who are sort of more fundamental in determining the direction that things go in.
Yeah.
So it's an understandable mistake, but
Got that right
oh
here.
yeah, dramas of the
To
mind.
concern yourself with surface political conflicts is to make the mistake of the bull in the ring. You're charging the cloth. That's what politics is for, to teach you the cloth.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
My son made a very successful documentary about William Burroughs.
Wow.
William Burroughs, A Man Within. More about his persona rather than a review of his work. And so I learned to I was impressed with his deep sarcasm and cynicism, and his insistence not to get attached to any group, organization, institution, or identity. So the LGBT group community wanted to wave the flag using his name, and he said, no, I'm not gay, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm queer. Queer is more like a philosophy. Now it is an identity, regardless identity. And yeah, every Thanksgiving at the table, I read his Thanksgiving prayer, which he dedicated to John Dillinger. It's very short.
I'm familiar with this.
Oh yeah, it's a critical view of American society all over the border. It's funny.
Now I have to find that.
Okay, take
Thanksgiving
care.
prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
William S. Burroughs.
There is a reading by him, and there is a better reading by Vincent Van Sant. Also free online. Anyway, thank you for the stimulating discussion. We'll see you next week.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Okay. Bye, Darren.
See you soon.
Bye.
All right. I think we're, at our logical endpoint.